The, the eco states or the ecological states that we mentioned before when we're talking about states A, B, C, and D. So this can be done at the site scale when you're actually out here looking at the quality of the sagebrush in the field. But importantly, this is also done remotely, and the technology now allows us to, at the landscape scale, assess the quality and the quantity of the habitats. So you can say that within your management area of interest, and for sage grouse, it's generally at the pack scale. The eco states or the ecological states that we mentioned before when we're talking about states A, B, C, and D. So this can be done at the site scale when you're actually out here looking at the quality of the sagebrush in the field. But importantly, this is also done remotely, and the technology now allows us to, at the landscape scale, assess the quality and the quantity of the habitats. So you can say that within your management area of interest,
for a test. I can pull up one of last month's. Okay. Alrighty, perfect. Thank you for testing that with me.
not PowerPoint, which I've never done before. Are you guys seeing?
Chair Wall, whenever you'd like to kick us off. Mary, are you there? Tavi, are you hearing me?
I hear you, Debbie. I don't hear Mary.
Wait a minute. We have a couple commissioners still to come on. There's one of
Okay.
them.
Or are we waiting for Commissioner King?
Dahlia, have you heard anything from Dr. King this morning? I haven't, I thought she was going to be on here. Okay. We'll give her one more minute and then I think we'll start because we have a couple of agenda items to do before the training actually starts.
Has somebody texted her? Do we want to try to do that? See if she's having any troubles?
She's here.
Michelle, are we ready to go live?
Yes, whenever you are ready to go, we are also ready.
Mary, are you ready to get going?
I am. I was just waiting to hear back from Michelle. Did she already answer?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I didn't hear her answer.
Okay.
So good. Appreciate you saying that. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the October 10th Fish and Wildlife Commission meeting. And this one is, as I think all of you know, entirely virtual. I'm Mary Wall, Chair of the Fish and Wildlife Commission, and I'd like to call our Friday, October 10th, 2025 meeting to order. Let's do introductions of the other commissioners, starting with the Vice Chair, and then we'll just go down, right down the line. Go ahead, Vice Chair Hatfield-Hyde.
Thank you, Chair Wall. Good morning, Becky Hatfield-Hyde, calling in from a crisp east side of Oregon this morning.
Thank you. Commissioner Labhart.
Good morning, Mark Labhart, calling in from Sisters.
Thank you. And Commissioner Spellbrink.
Yeah, also good morning, Bob Spellbrink, Siletz, Oregon.
Commissioner King.
Hi, good morning. Coming to you live from the Fred Meyer Drainage, which is where the Clackamas Regional Office is here in Portland.
Thank you. And Commissioner DeFries.
Good morning, Dallas Hall DeFries, coming from Baker County.
Thank you, everyone. Director Colbert, will you introduce yourself, please?
Good morning, everyone. Debbie Colbert, Director of Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. Good to see you all.
Thank you. And Michelle, can you tell us what we need to know about any of the logistics for either us or anyone watching online?
Thank you, Chair Wall. Good morning. My name is Michelle Tate, and I'm here to provide support to the Commission and to the Director for today's meeting. Let's cover a couple of quick housekeeping and technical things. Please keep your microphones muted unless you're speaking. This is going to help us reduce any kind of background noise. Public has access to this meeting through the YouTube, and that link can be found on our YouTube page. If you're having any kind of technical issues, go ahead and just text me, and we'll see if we can work them out. Also wanted to make sure that everyone knows that this is being recorded and will be entered into the permanent record. And that's all I have today. Back to you, Chair Wall.
Perfect. Thank you, Michelle. So for today's meeting, we do have two quick items, agenda items before we start the training. The first one is the temporary rules, and if we could go to the Director for those.
Yes, again, we have a few temporary rules on your agenda. There's 13 total. Much of this is kind of the typical Columbia River activities that you see in our temp roles often. You'll also see the follow up to the coho seasons that you asked for some additional days. We were able to go back to the federal agencies and that was approved. So that's great news. And then the last one, just in case you have questions on number 13 that's listed there, it's temporary rules to update some of the commercial fishing licenses and permits consistent with the statute. And those will actually be permanent rules for you in December. But because we start selling some of these in November for the next license year, and some of them are referenced, the cost is referenced in rules, we needed to go ahead and update those, and then we'll bring you a permanent rule package in December. But that way we can start selling in November. And I think that unless there's any other questions.
I don't see hands up. I can't see every commissioner, so if I miss somebody, holler if you have a question, but I don't see any. So is there a motion on these temporary rules?
I move to ratify the 13 temporary rules set forth on the October 10th, 2025 agenda.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Good.
I think that was a second from Dr. King.
Commissioner Labhart.
Commissioner Labhart, sorry.
Sorry.
Moved and seconded to ratify the 13 temporary rules as was just read into the record. Could we have a voice vote on this one, Michelle, just in case we can't see everybody?
Commissioner Spellbrink,
Yes.
Labhart,
Yes.
Hatfield Hyde,
Yes.
Dallas DeFreeze,
Yes.
King,
Yes.
Wall.
Yes.
Did I get everybody?
I think you did, and
Okay.
the motion passes. And so could we go then to, under other business, we do have the 2026 commission meeting dates, and I think that Sean is going to walk us through this real quickly.
Yeah, morning, Chair Wall, Vice Chair Hatfield Hyde, Commissioners, and Director Colbert. For the record, Sean Clements, Deputy Director at the department. The dates in front of you here, the starting point for thinking about dates for 2026 was the 2025 dates. We made a few changes here that I'll just kind of step through. One being that in April, we moved it a week later, and that was to accommodate the PFMC schedule. So in April, we typically bring you some of the ocean salmon regulations, and because the PFMC meeting had been moved a week later in April, we needed to move this back to give staff time to prepare the package. One of the other changes was in June, moving that back a week later to avoid a lot of the conflicts that occur in June. And then we tried to keep a kind of a regular cadence of about one meeting per month, and moving the January meeting back a week so that we avoid some of the conflicts with the holidays, and moving the February meeting to avoid conflict with the Sportsman's Show. So what you see there is about a meeting every month, 6 or 7 changes from the last year, 2025, and hopefully there's no conflicts here for you. And yeah, if we can get these locked in, it'd be good.
Great. Commissioners, are there questions or thoughts on these? And I know there was one commissioner for whom this made a difficulty for one of the meetings, but are there questions or concerns? I can't see hands up, so if you do
Okay.
have a
Hey,
question,
Chair
just,
Wall,
yeah.
I'll remove my hand because I figured you couldn't see me. It's Commissioner King. So are we still doing 2 of the meetings virtually? I guess we're not yet discussing results of the survey or the rest of it. These are literally just the dates.
Yes.
The dates, yeah, we're still waiting, Commissioner King, we're still waiting on the survey results to come in. So we're looking at that soon, but the plan is still to do 2 virtual meetings. And then we'll see where the location preferences come in and try and align that with availability, weather, and all those kind of factors.
Right. And then understanding, so the placeholders are May November. I can't see fully your screen. It's May, November, and July?
Yeah, it's the same, Commissioner King, it's the same placeholders we have in past years, including this year.
Great, thanks. When will we talk more about the rest of it?
Commissioner King, once we get the survey results in, we typically come back to you in December and talk about what we heard, what we're thinking about for the next year, commission priorities, all those kind of things. So December.
Great. Okay, thanks.
Other commissioners with questions? If not, could I get a sense of the commission? I don't think we necessarily need a vote on this one, but sense of the commission, I'm assuming that these dates work with the one exception I know for you, Commissioner Labhart. Sorry about that one in April. If the commission is ready to give a nod to this, can we just get a thumbs up on it? Debbie, are you seeing any? It looks good to me from the people that I can see. Okay.
Yep.
Thank you, Sean and commissioners. We've sort of got those dates now locked in, and we'll do a lot of work between now and December on content and those pieces. So I think that with that, we are ready to go to the main event for the day, and we'll let Director Colbert start us off on the training.
Well, I really just want to start by thanking all of you for being here this morning and the commitment that you have to this important work. I'm just going to make a couple statements, and then Davia is really going to talk a little bit more to kind of kick us off. We have some outstanding speakers this morning, and we just so appreciate them joining us. I do wanted to mention that Davia and I were just this week at the governor's annual Government to Government Summit. And so for me, this timing feels so relevant, given the powerful reminder that we saw at the summit of the depth and diversity of Oregon's tribal nations, their histories, their priorities, and their expectations for how we work together. And one message came through clearly at the summit, that consultation is not a checkbox, it's a relationship. And like any relationship, it requires time and a willingness to listen to and adapt. And each tribe has its own definition of what meaningful consultation looks like. So this is not a one-size-fits-all approach, and that's part of the challenge. It's also part of the opportunity that we have as we think about consultation practices. And the other thing that was also very clear is that this is a very high priority for our governor, that agencies lean in and really do their best work with regard to consultation with Oregon's 9 federally recognized tribes. I also feel like I have to acknowledge that as an agency, we have not been consistent in how we do consultation. And I was meeting with members of Tribal Council recently on an issue, and I do think that we as an agency have done consultation in pretty much every way you can imagine, and have not had a lot of consistency with our tribes across the state. So we're really excited that this kicks off this broader conversation about how the department and the commission will engage in consultation. And one of the kind of key points of the discussion this week was at the summit was around what they were calling the 4 C's, which is collaboration, coordination, communication, and consultation. And really, how do we hit the marks for each of our 9 federally recognized tribes in terms of each of those 4 C's? So I'm going to turn it over to Davia, but I just really appreciate how engaged you are on this topic. Heard from many of you going into the training, just how excited that you were to see us leaning into this topic. And this really, today is the kickoff of a longer term conversation with all of you. So I'll hand it over to Davia.
Thanks, Director Colbert, and good morning, Chair Wall and members of the Commission. For the record, my name is Davia Palmieri. I work in the Director's Office for the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. Thanks for being here today and for your attention to the training. I'm really excited to bring this to you. And as Debbie said, we have two really fantastic speakers that we're lucky to get some of their time. So I'm excited to get to it. But before we do start, I wanted to make sure that we're clear that this training is not in any way comprehensive. It's intended to give all of the commission members a small shared baseline of information as part of an ongoing learning process in which we hope to develop best practices for tribal consultation over the next few months. As you can see from the materials we provided to you, there is a lot of content available to help you deepen your knowledge on your own. And if you haven't already, I urge you to watch the Heart and Soul videos, which each of the 9 tribes spent considerable time preparing last year. And they did bring it up at the summit this week as a key resource. I also want to acknowledge and remind you all that the tribes are not a monolith, and no tribal member or staff represents all of Oregon's tribes. Each of the 9 federally recognized tribes in Oregon has a unique culture, experience, and history. And we hope you'll be able to review the book First Oregonians, which tells these 9 stories in their own words. I also want to remind you that the relationship between the state and the tribes is government to government. So it's between the elected leaders of the tribes and the state of Oregon. So I'll provide a little context for today, and then I'll come back after we have our 2 guests and talk a little bit more about where we go from here. But starting with why are we here today? So we, the department and the commission, are tasked with managing and making decisions about Oregon's fish and wildlife. In recent years, the commission has heard more and more from Oregon's 9 federally recognized tribes because they do have a vested interest in a future where Oregon's fish and wildlife populations are abundant. And the challenges to reaching that goal continue to grow more complex and challenging. And I appreciate the growing opportunities to work together to solve those challenges. Fish and wildlife are deeply valued by Oregon's tribal nations, and there's a strong role for them to play in sustaining our species alongside the department and the commission, which is really getting towards our learning goal number 1 for the day, to deepen our understanding of fish and wildlife as cultural resources. So we have a responsibility to manage fish and wildlife according to the state's wildlife policy in statute, but the state also has government-to-government relationship that must be considered in other statutes. So Oregon law states that, quote, a state agency shall make a reasonable effort to cooperate with tribes in the development and implementation of programs of the state agency that affect tribes. This seems exceptionally important for ODF&W because Indigenous peoples have stewarded the lands, waters, fish, and wildlife of what is now called Oregon since time immemorial. The formation of the state of Oregon was accompanied by the forced removal of tribal nations from their ancestral lands and the loss of sovereignty over the management of natural resources. Despite those injustices, tribes have retained rights through treaties, executive orders, and federal law related to the take and management of fish and wildlife. The state has been taking intentional steps to restore access and opportunity for tribal members to hunt, fish, and trap where we can, and to support increased tribal sovereignty in fish and wildlife management. Each of the 9 tribes has a different history and context underpinning their take of fish and wildlife that sits in the broader context of federal Indian law that we'll talk about today. Understanding tribal sovereignty and retained treaty and property rights to help us move forward in the diverse landscapes are the other goals that we have for today. And then our third goal gets at the fact that this training is a first step. We're trying to ground ourselves in the foundational concepts of tribal sovereignty, cultural resources, and treaty reserved rights. But these are legal, cultural, and ecological realities that shape how the tribes expect to be engaged in decisions that affect their communities. So this training is not the end goal, it's the beginning of a process. So it's our intent to work together with each tribe over the next few months to develop best practices for how the commission and the department engage with tribes. These best practices will feature clear principles for the department to help us understand our role and how to make decisions. Will be rooted in respect for sovereignty and shaped by the voices of the tribes themselves. To do that, we'll soon initiate direct one-on-one consultations with each of Oregon's 9 federally recognized tribes. We'll ask how they expect to be consulted, what meaningful engagement looks like to them, what has worked in the past and what hasn't. We'll listen carefully, document what we hear, and synthesize those insights into best practices that reflect clear expectations against which we can then hold ourselves accountable in the future. This will take time and willingness to learn, but I do believe it will lead to stronger partnerships better decisions, and outcomes that honor the deep connections that tribes have to fish, wildlife, and the lands and waters here in Oregon. So both of today's speakers are well practiced at speaking with groups like ours. So I really do encourage you to ask your questions while we have this time, which is a great opportunity. I look forward to going through this with you all today. And if there's not any questions from commissioners at this point, I'll get us started with our first presenter. All right. So our first session is focused on the fact that Oregon's fish and wildlife are important cultural resources to the tribes. So joining us today, we have Eric Klemps, the Director of Natural Resources for the Confederated Tribes at the Umatilla Indian Reservation. He's been in that role since 2004, where he implemented the first foods management approach that he'll share with you today. Eric has spent much of his career trying to relate the culture of CTUIR to the ecology of the Columbia Basin, and in doing so, trying to promote the tribe's culture, natural resource restoration goals, and treaty rights. He draws on his personal, community, and cultural experiences and professional background in natural resources. And he's presented this first foods management approach in a variety of forums here in our region and across the world. So we are really lucky to have him with us this morning. And I'll turn it over to Eric.
Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you.
Okay.
I can't hear very loud.
I was gonna say, I can't hear him really at all.
Okay.
Can we test that one more time, Eric?
Yes, can you hear me okay?
Just quiet.
I have one mic, it's my laptop mic, so.
It's a little soft, so we may ask you to repeat a few things, Eric.
Okay. Share this. You've seen that share screen okay, the presentation?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, first of all, I'd like to thank you all for your time today, the opportunity to share our work with you. I know there's very busy, and I appreciate all the time on your agenda presentation that I hope will address the themes that have been discussed already. Introduction, a little bit more about my background. I have a bachelor's in wildlife science from Oregon State University. Had spent about 8 years in U.S. Forest Service and had a very diverse training there. Interdisciplinary training as a wildlife. 8 years as a wildlife biologist here, and the last 20 now as director of our. And I'd like to walk you through a actual serving ritual example of traditional foods. Demonstrate some of the ecological and spatial information inherent in that serving order that can be used for management, how we've developed target visions, support of first foods, applied restoration and management. Our approach calls out the need for reciprocity as a requisite to sustainability. And I'd like to talk about the transferability of the management visions and opportunities for collaboration with Oregon. So a little background on our tribe. We're a confederation of 3 bands, the Umatilla, Walla Walla, Cayuse. We have a ceded land base of about 6.4 million acres. That's the kind of larger olive polygon you see there. And you see the reservation boundary, the diminished boundary, 172,000 acres. Much larger boundary that's still dispute on some edges of that reservation. 255,000 acres. Currently have over 3,100 tribal members. We have a much larger Aboriginal use area that we used historically. This is from our place names atlas. This is kind of a density map of tribal use of the West. The kind of the denser rust color indicating higher concentration of use. Surprising, it's the Columbia and the Snake. in there. Have history of use from what is now current day California to Alaska, east to Montana. Work I'm going to present to you today, we apply Tucannon, Walla Walla, John Day, and basins. When I speak about the vision in particular, and the upland vision. And our reservation is a checkerboard of land ownership, both several classes of tribal land. There's tribal fee, allotted lands that are allotted to families or individuals, tribal trust, non-tribal fee. This map, the kind of yellowish color is non-tribal fee. The light blue is tribal trust. Dark blue is tribal fee. And, various allotments, families or individuals. And I'm going to talk about a project, Beecham Creek, as an example of our vision implementation. That's there, that arrow, Beecham Creek. And I use that example frequently because we had a really strong effort in monitoring because of the significance of the investments in that project, scale of the project, which was peak at the time. Some of you may have seen that before, but we have a lot of great data on that project. So our mission here at the tribe is to protect, restore, and enhance first foods. And in this mission statement, we list some examples: otter, the salmon, deer, ouch, huckleberry, the perpetual cultural, economic, and sovereign benefit of the tribe. And then it talks a little bit about how we will do that using traditional ecological knowledge, science, and actions, even our policies and regulatory measures. This mission we developed was inspired by things I heard from the community throughout my life. I proposed this as a mission back in 2006, and the Board of Trustees tribe adopted it in 2007, and operating under it ever since. But one individual, Louis Dick, always advocated for cold, pure water and salmon. I heard him advocate for that a number of times early in my life and throughout my life. And another committee member, his wife actually said, "You're always talking about the men's foods. Who's going to take care of the women's food?" Heard that comment through Louis when he was actually given a presentation to Forest Service staff and PF&W staff, camped above the banks of the Umatilla River. In that meeting, I was a Forest Service employee. He was invited to talk about the importance of water and salmon. He was giving that talk, and then he made that comment about the women's food, and that always stuck in my head, hearing that through Louis, but his wife. So if you've never been to a First Foods Feast in the Columbia Basin, I wanted to give you an example of what it can look like. This is an image here from Pendleton Mission, Reservation. And these are men practicing the Washut religion or Seven Drum religion. In the photo on the left is Louis Dick, and I quoted on a previous slide. He's deceased now. And my father, Peter Quimps, who's also deceased. Gail Shippentauer, still active in the community. His son works, Gene, is in our fisheries research and monitoring program for the fisheries program. Gene's son is wrapping up his fisheries degree at Oregon State University. Armin Minthorn next, and he's still active in our community. And then the last man is Paul Quimps, my uncle, also deceased. And this photo was taken at a different event. It wasn't taken during a serving of traditional food. So when the foods are served, and I'm going to walk you through an example, men are singing songs about the foods and the earth, while they're being served, and that's part of the Kamanwat, or the Creator's Law. That has to happen. Serve the foods, and we're remembering the promise they made to take care of us. This is a great photo from Joel Davis, a good example of what it can look like. I'm going to walk you through an example of a serving order. This one will be fairly simple. There's a very diverse list of foods I'll show you later. First thing that's served is water, and then the salmon, deer, the couch, I'll use in this example. It's a lomatium, a root, and then the huckleberry. And then it's important to remember that all traditional meals close at the end, a sip of water. So we close with water, start the meals with water. And there's a very diverse list of foods, as I mentioned. And these foods, this serving order isn't just a menu list of foods. This comes from tribal creation belief that when the world was created and the creators preparing the world for the Indian people that are to come, he asked the animal people who's going to take care of the Indian people and help them. And this is the order in which they made the promise. So the salmon was the first to make a promise to feed the people, other fish lining up behind the salmon, deer promising to feed the people. You know, they can use my body for tools, clothing. Think of the, you know, bones, the antlers, the hide, and the roots and the berries promising to feed the people. There's a recognition that all and people depend on water. And so water is used to initiate and close traditional feasts. And to Butch's comment about women's foods, there are gender roles associated with harvesting and serving foods for the feast. So men will serve the water, fish, and the big game. Women will serve the roots and the berries. This is strictly adhered to during the feast. During the rest of the year, you know, people will harvest across those roles. Like there are men that will dig roots and pick berries, and there are women that will fish or hunt. But during the actual feast, like a root feast or a huckleberry feast, there are specific roles in that feast. And this is to give you an idea what it can look like. Across the top, I have some examples of the foods. Got water, Chinook salmon, mule deer, bitterroot, and huckleberry. That image on the left, the men are getting ready to serve, and you can see there's plates of food all prepared. That's all tied to the number of tables that we have, you know, the size of the feast, the number of people, and the number of servers relates to the number of tables. And then there's a picture of the women before one of the feasts. And you have to understand that, you know, this can be very large sometimes. You can have several hundred people at a feast. And so it's all very systematic, very orderly, and we're trying to serve quickly. As I mentioned earlier, the drummers have to sing the entire time the foods are being served. And while they love the songs and they love to sing, they don't want to sing all day long. And so we're trying to be very efficient. This isn't like a diagram of our longhouse here. This would be an aerial view of it if you were inside of it. So what I have there is 14 tables. The little blue dots represent cups of water that have already been served because water is served first. That rectangle in the middle is the wash. That's an actual rectangle of earth in the longhouse. That's used for different ceremonies. It's very important, for example, during funerals, when bodies of community members rest there during the services. Those services will typically include a first foods meal. And you see on the one end, the two tables, that's where the drummers would be sitting, and they would be facing east and singing songs while the foods are being served. And the servers, the men are going to come out first from behind those two tables, and they'll take their salmon to the end of that other end where the E arrow is facing east. We're going to have 14 tables, so there'll be 7 servers. We each have 2 plates of fish in our hand. And we're going to turn to recognize each unique food when we get down to that end of the longhouse before we start serving. And so, you know, there might be Chinook salmon that's cooked over fire that's served, and then there might be Chinook salmon that's served with something else. So we wouldn't turn when we bring out a different preparation of the Chinook. When we switch to a different species like lamprey or eel, then we would turn again for each unique food. So we're going to go in order of age, and the first server is going to put his first plate of salmon on that first table, and that disc or that plate is color coded to the top to the foods. And then the second plate on the next table, if I'm second, I do the same thing, and the person behind me does the same thing. And we go around the longhouse as a unit and put salmon on the same place on every table. And we serve the rest of the fish, the big game, and then we get out of the way, and the women do the roots and the berries until every table looks the same. So every table is a reminder of that creation story. It's actually replaying the creation story, and that a reminder of the promise those foods made to take care of us. And so you can't sit anywhere and not see that serving order. And just a couple different examples. There's on the left, there's people seated on the ground on tule mats. I've been to feasts like that. We have some more contemporary images like from our longhouse that are a little different, but then on the right, some of the foods being prepared, salmon, deer, and couch. But one thing I want to emphasize as a former biologist and somebody who was interested in ecology, and I took all the ecology I could, and I had the interdisciplinary training, is, ecology is technically defined as a relationship between an organism and its environment. And I would say between a being and its environment, because this serving order describes our relationship to the environment, to these foods. There are relationships between and among the foods that are recognized, and we can use these relationships in thinking about our management, and remembering that when we manage for these resources, we're not managing for them in the abstract. We're managing really for people. And I think that often gets lost in our work. If you think about different environmental standards, maybe they're water quality standards or they're ESA, we're not managing for a standard in the abstract. We're managing for water quality because we want people to be able to use water, to be able to enjoy it. We want recovery, we want abundance so people can harvest and consume these foods. And I think that's something that is shared by tribal and non-tribal people alike. And I just think we need to kind of recontextualize how we present that or some of our management goals, because I do think that gets lost sometimes. I want to talk about the spatial distribution of these foods based on the serving order. This is the Umatilla Basin and the streams within it. Many of these are ephemeral, so water doesn't flow in them all year long, but the drainage basins, the historical distribution of salmon. This is some traditional hunting areas from our oral histories for big game, and big game are typically vertical migrants using lower elevations in winter, higher elevations in summer. And then we've modeled the distribution of potential distribution of couch across the landscape, and then the huckleberry. And if you go back to the serving order, that you see the serving order takes us from in-stream in the floodplain across the landscape to the mountains where the huckleberry is. So there's also some general spatial information in this serving order. There are a number of feasts around these foods. The first one that's typically recognized is the winter solstice, because that's when the sun is going to start coming back. And so when the sun is returning, we know, there's the light's returning, the foods are going to start coming back. That's celebrated. There's typically a celery feast here in February, salmon feast in April at Celilo, for example. And we have root feasts here in April or May, and huckleberry feasts in July or August. And these feasts are determined by the foods, when they're ready. The phenology of the foods are not set by a calendar date, so they can vary. But people will go out and be checking the foods and determine when the feasts are going to be. And these foods are also served at regular religious services and even funerals, memorials for people, and namings. And that's when somebody takes an Indian name. And so just thinking about that again across the landscape, that serving order and the solstice, and then just the combination of both the ecological and spatial information, that message about the creation belief and the reciprocity. I just think this is a really rich source of information, the serving order. I always characterize it as very powerful and elegant. It looks very simple to see it play out, but there's a wealth of information in it that comes from thousands of years of experience with the landscape. And there's a lot we can take from it to guide our management. Its first foods are recognized through a number of community celebrations, or powwows, as some people call them. There'll be dance categories that will require people to have had a first food ceremony sometimes, whether it's a men's dance category that requires a first kill ceremony, or women's basket hat category that might require participants to have had a first digging or first picking ceremony. And what that is at an individual level, or the first time somebody harvests a salmon, they might give that away to somebody in the community, usually an elder, for their first kill, the deer. And then it's very similar for the girls and the young women. The first time they dig roots, or the first time they pick berries, they'll often be recognized at a root feast or a huckleberry feast. And they'll be called to the front of the room, and they'll announce, that this is so-and-so. This is the first time she went digging or picking, and she wants to give her roots or her berries to her grandmother in the audience. So they're recognized for that, and generally people applaud, and it's very encouraging for them, and it calls attention to the importance of these first foods. So really, I think of the culture as being food dependent. If you think about all the activities that go on around food, the teaching and learning between and among generations, to harvest the foods, prepare them, the ceremonies, celebrating them, the consumption, and then that message about reciprocity, the message to share the foods and care for them. All of that requires that, there be healthy physical and ecological processes to provide the foods, and that tribal members have access to the foods for all of that to occur. So in DNR, we manage for those physical and ecological processes and access. There was a theme around health in the agenda topic. And so I just want to point out, that for the spiritual and cultural and physical health of the tribe, these foods are necessary. There's a foundation of creation, belief, and religion. They inspire cultural activities at multiple levels within the community, whether it's the individual, the family, or groups of family, the tribe, and a much larger community. Because when we have these feasts, we typically have participants from other tribes. People are invited. So there's often a great deal of visitors at the feast. So these foods promote multiple dimensions of health in the community. And I look at, these U.S. government kind of guides to healthy diets and healthy distributions of kinds of food change a little bit over time. They've used different graphics. But here's one I thought was interesting. And, if you think about the traditional serving order, you have a diet that's got protein, fairly low carbs, it's got fruit, low sugar for the most part, and water. And I always say that it was the Atkins diet before there was ever an Atkins. You got high protein, healthy fats like the omega-3s, some carbs, and vitamin C and some sugars in the fruits, and water. So it's a very healthy diet. So it's physically healthy as well as spiritually and culturally. In the Treaty of 1855, which we negotiated in the Walla Walla Valley, Article 1 speaks to the right of hunting, fishing, and gathering. And for fishing, hunting, and gathering, and that relates directly to First Foods and was inspired by First Foods. It's important to remember that these are pre-existing rights that the tribe had, and they were retained in the treaty. They were not conferred to the tribe by the U.S. government. Rather, they were, again, pre-existing and retained, and we like to make that distinction. And so just to summarize, our management approach, emphasizes the importance of reciprocity. We look at the ecology of the foods, the spatial distribution, and then we can link that to the treaty rights, and that helps inform our relationships with other governments. And we can take this serving order to inform our management and hopefully find places to collaborate. A little bit about our organization in DNR. I relate program functions to the serving order. So we have a water resources program, fisheries, wildlife. We have a range and forestry program that addresses women foods. And then we have 3 programs that work across all of the foods. Currently, we have about 155 FTEs in the department, and we work in that very extensive area that I showed you in the earlier maps. So I want to talk about some applied examples. If we want to improve water quality and fish abundance, it's a common problem. Thinking about water quality in terms of temperature, in this example. So we developed a river vision, and this was inspired by a paper, Freshwater Biology, that the authors reviewed a number of river restoration efforts and found that many of them were lacking a clear vision for what success was, or clear benchmarks from reference reaches, and they lacked interdisciplinary input into planning. And so we took from that paper and we developed a vision that becomes a framework for planning our management and restoration efforts. It's a benchmark for assessing our progress and outcomes. And then it provides the decision context necessary so we can prioritize our management actions and decisions. And we define a healthy river as one that's capable of providing first foods that sustain the continuity of the tribe's culture. And it requires a dynamic river in terms of both physical and biological processes and the connections between them. The first what we call touchstone of a healthy river in our vision is the hydrology, the volume and timing of the water. Historically, people focused on the summer months. That's like a typical hydrograph going from January through December, and July through October. You see the really low flow months, and historically there's a lot of focus on those areas. But we recognize the entire hydrograph is important for forming habitat, charging groundwater, providing biological cues for different species. Our second touchstone is geomorphology, that the floodplain is topographically diverse and accessible by the river. Connectivity, that the water can move longitudinally, laterally across the floodplain, and vertically, the hyporheic zone, that shallow aquifer underneath the river. Riparian vegetation, and then the biota. The fish need to be there, and people need to have access to them. We say if all of these 5 things are present and interactive, we should have a river that can sustain continuity of the tribe's culture. And it's not just about Chinook salmon, it's about many different species, sockeye, lamprey. We work with freshwater mussels. And so we move from the serving order that the community recognizes and values to the river vision and those 5 touchstones. And then we can align our restoration actions and even our monitoring with each of those touchstones. So I'm happy that my staff, we have a pretty large staff, but they all know the serving order. So they all know that when they're working on a restoration project, how it relates to this vision, and they can move along that continuum from the serving order through the restoration actions and understand the relationships. In Meacham Creek, we did a large restoration project, a little over a mile. The channel had been penned against the one side of the floodplain by the Union Pacific Railroad. You can see the road and the tracks in the upper edge of that image. But after the 64 floods, the railroad went along Meacham Creek and made a number of dikes and levees. This levee, again, was over a mile long and penned the river on one side of the floodplain, and it was very warm because it had lost that lateral and vertical connectivity. There was no real groundwater to speak of. So we renaturalized the channel, looking at historical photos, looking at LiDAR data and seeing old channel patterns. We reestablished a sinuous multi-threaded channel there that you can see 2020. And this reestablished groundwater in the reach and surface and groundwater interactions and better thermal conditions for native fish. We had extensive monitoring in the reach. You can see the number of wells we had there. And then for several years, we monitored surface temperature with temperature loggers. And we were able to document through that effort over about 30 springs where colder water was upwelling from having reestablished that connectivity, much of it either in the channel or side channels, or on different parts of the floodplain. You had springs upwelling and creating colder water diversity. And if this works, sometimes it doesn't. We're also able to monitor and see spring Chinook rearing in this reach. So in that photo on the left, that's an upwelling spring. That riparian vegetation has recovered on its own. We had several pair of spring Chinook spawn in the restoration reach, and you're seeing juvenile spring Chinook rear in a reach that was previously too warm to support either spawning or rearing for spring Chinook. So by reestablishing that connectivity and that cold water diversity, we're seeing fish production in that reach again. Currently in the process of updating the River Vision. We're going to make access a touchstone in the River Vision. We're about 99% done with that product. We do that in collaboration with Krista Jones from USGS, Tim Beachy from NOAA, who's now retired, Jeff Poole from Montana State University, and a colleague of mine, Scott O'Daniel from Umatilla Tribe here that is also recently retired. And we do the same thing for the upland. We worked with Oregon State University, Dr. Brian Indris, and developed an upland vision. The touchstones in that include landscape pattern, soil health, hydrologic function, and then the biota again. And so if you look at the landscape here in northeastern Oregon, you'll see these patterns, typically north and east aspects dominated by trees, south and west facing often in grasslands or shrubs. We've done a great deal of work here on the reservation to address forest health, thinning beetle kill, and overstock stands. We had a number of decades of no forest management on the reservation. After we compacted that function from the Bureau of Indian Affairs and took it over, we developed and have been implementing a management plan. So we are actively managing forests and trying to address issues like beetle kill. And you can see the results pre and post harvest. Thinning stands, doing fuels management and broadcast burning, cleaning up fuels in the forest. We're also, we have 3 weather stations in the blues at different elevations, and we're monitoring weather patterns and huckleberry habitat. So this weather station monitors precipitation, wind speed and direction, soil temperature, humidity, all these factors. And each day it's taking a picture of the plants. And so we can relate the phenological development of the huckleberry to the actual physical weather variables that we're measuring. We want to look at this over a longer term and see if climate variability affects the production or maybe even the distribution of huckleberry in the Blue Mountains. We have some work going on around pollinators of first foods, very important. Understanding that there's important genus of bumblebees that pollinate foods and make for productive huckleberries. Without the pollination, you don't get the fruit production. And we're also looking at those species that pollinate the roots. This example, couch, that's in that photo on the right, you can see the couch that was freshly harvested. Those are cuppins or the digging sticks that are used. That photo of that bumblebee that was in my truck on a ridge here on the reservation when I took my daughter out to dig. And so those are one of the pollinators of these plants. Just summarize our approach again. I want to talk about some of our challenges we have, I think, that are shared between the tribes in Oregon. Energy and mineral development, we're seeing likely a weakening of ESA and NEPA, increased fossil fuel production and use, climate change impacts, and then persistent toxics in the environment. In the state, we tend to see over-appropriated surface flows, groundwater development, and over-development impacting surface flow sometimes. Floodplain development is a product of land use planning. And again, the climate change and the toxics. Looking at the climate change issue here in the Umatilla, this is a projection of about 75 years out if we don't see any reductions in carbon emissions. The blue rectangles you see are the historical flow patterns for the Umatilla Basin. The red are the future projected flow patterns. So it's interesting if you look, we usually have our peak flows in April, and you can see that. But in the future, we see potential for there to be 4 additional months where the flows are higher than what we have in April now. But it'll be very variable. Our lows will also be lower. So, a great deal of variability coming our way that we need to address. I think there's a number of tools we can use to collaborate with Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. We have the Columbia Basin Restoration Initiative, Integrated Water Resources Strategy. In this basin, we're working on our water rights settlement, and then in Walla Walla, we have the 2050 plan. I'd like to see the agency start using our vision touchstones in collaboration with the tribe. And I want to, emphasize that these first foods are obviously native species of Oregon, right? So the state has responsibility for these species. You have an Oregon Water Resources Department responsible for water. So there's a lot of overlap between our goals, a lot of shared goals, I think. So across the serving order, I can think of a number of places where Umatilla Tribe and departments of Oregon can work to our shared mutual benefit. Looking at it across the landscape, the distribution of from the uplands to the river, to the surface flows, and across those touchstones, we can align agency work. And I want to emphasize that our approach is something that we want to see transferred. It's not something we want to just keep to ourselves, but we want to see collaboration around these river vision and upland vision touchstones with state agencies. I think a big issue coming up for the future is flood risk management and insurability. And there are a number of places where we can work to restore floodplains, like the example I showed you with Meacham Creek. We have a project, some of you have seen the Birch Creek project at the confluence of the Umatilla River with a willing landowner who put land into a conservation easement. And that's going to provide restored connectivity and better fish habitat and juvenile fish habitat, but it's also going to provide flood risk management benefits, spread the water out, store it, reduce the impact of flows downstream. And I think there's going to need to be more of that work in the future. And again, I want to emphasize the need for reciprocity, and then say that I hope I met the goals of this presentation, and acknowledge the people in the community who inspired my thinking on this. Some of the co-authors on the River Vision, and a number of staff who contributed to this presentation with different graphics. Then see if you have any questions.
Thanks so much, Eric.
I
Anyone
I
want
know
to start
that was a
with
lot
question?
and it's fast, but I do want to emphasize both the cultural values and the applied management and really try to emphasize collaboration. So thank you.
Chair Wall?
I can't hear you.
You're on
muted.
mute.
Now can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Eric. It's the second time I got to hear a version of your presentation, and it's even richer with information this time, I think, in terms of how this might apply to us jointly. But what I'd like to ask you is if you could talk a little bit more about that integration of your approach that you built from sort of from the ground up, and how that's integrating with projects you're doing jointly with agencies.
One of the early examples we had was we did a memorandum of agreement with the Umatilla National Forest. Was very different time. They're not really responding to us at all anymore. But we did a memorandum of agreement, and that included work around First Foods and using the River Vision, that Meacham Creek project I mentioned. We did part of that on land owned by the tribe, but half of it was on land owned by the Forest Service. So we did all of the project design. They did the NEPA clearance for their portion of the land, and we did the design and all of the implementation. So it was a collaborative effort on both Forest Service land and tribally owned land. And so that was a great example. We're starting to see some of this, I think, get integrated into things like the 2050, where you see as key goals of the 2050 plan, floodplain health and flood risk management. So yeah, there are a number of examples with the pollinator work, which I think is really exciting. We're doing a lot of work with Oregon State University. There's tremendous amount of opportunity. If you return to the serving order, you can come up with management questions and ideas and find places to work together.
Thank you. Looks like we have Dr. King too.
Yeah, yes, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Thank you for your presentation. As you said, that was a lot, pretty darn fast. So I looked through the things that we were sent. We weren't sent a copy of your presentation. So having something like that would be handy. I don't know if we will eventually be given copies or it'll be forwarded somehow, but that would be helpful, because I think my biggest takeaway from this, and it kind of piggybacks onto Chair Wall's question, the serving order and how you have kind of structured it so that the colonialist mindset understands it, and how you used your serving order and then put the agencies on top, because we've siloed everything in a very different way than the way you've siloed everything. So that would be really helpful in terms of getting people to understand what you're even saying. And my question about the cooperation with the agencies, I'm reading just little snippets about what's going on with the Blue Mountains and that whole area and that whole restructuring, if that's even going to happen. But are you guys involved in that? And again, using kind of the concept of that serving area in that, serving order in that discussion, I think would be helpful, because it just seems like that whole process is really scattered and fractured right now.
Thank you. I agree. It would, and I will get you a PDF of this. Because a lot of the slides walk through processes. I clearly have a number of them. So when I'll do a PDF where I reduce the number of slides basically, and you'll get a copy of that this morning. What we're seeing now from the federal side is really no responsiveness at all to our input. And I think, and I've recommended to our Board of Trustees, that collaboration with Oregon and Washington is more important than ever. And that's why I reference examples like the Columbia Basin Restoration Initiative that we worked hard on together. I think we have a lot of shared goals in common. And I think that more so than ever, particularly for the next 3 years at least, we need to work together. We spent, for example, on the Forest Service, we spent 10 years helping develop what's known as the Ellis Project, which is supposed to be a forest health project that would also address big game security to try to keep big game on federal lands, public lands where the public and the tribe could access them. And they have now absolutely no interest in the big game security issue and closing roads after the harvest, no commitment to do so, and have been completely unresponsive to our comments, even though we collaborated for 10 years. You may be aware there was the Blues Intergovernmental Council, and I gave a presentation like this there a few years back, and I have to admit, when I got there, this forest management and access management are very contentious, and so the mood was very, very negative. And it was so negative, to be honest, I almost left. I almost didn't give my presentation, but it would have been the first time I never gave a talk I committed to. So I said, I've got to do it. And I went through it, and I went through our examples of our forest management. And one person said, well, that's what we all want, and it was really, I was really relieved. It would just change the whole tone of the meeting. Because we're showing the importance of these foods, we're showing how we're doing forest management and active forest management. And so it was just completely changed the meeting. And my experience has been, to be honest, that people tend to find this pretty inspiring. And I think there's a couple of reasons for that. One is we all relate to food. We all need food, obviously, but food is where a lot of social interactions happen, right? And cultures have rituals around food, families. It's a great way to bring people together, and it's a way to say we have things in common. Even if we look at the world a little bit differently, we share some of these same processes. So I suspect that's part of the reason why people relate to this well and find it a very positive approach, which I'm very happy for. But yeah, as far as the feds, again, right now they're just not being responsive to us.
Thank you. And I know other folks have questions, but I think, again, back to the slides that you talked about, like superimposing what the state agencies look like and how that relates to your serving order helps a lot, because it does help to demonstrate that we are all doing the same thing. We're saying the same thing in a different way. That is something I found really helpful, that visual. So thank you again.
Yep, and you will get those. Thank you.
Great. Let's go. Thank you. Let's go to Director Colbert and then Vice Chair Hatfield-Hyde.
Director Quimps, I'm one of those people that finds this very inspiring, and I am wondering if you have any thoughts on, one of the things that we talk with our commission around is kind of just like all biodiversity. And so when you think about things like songbirds or amphibians, how do you think about relating those kind of non-game? I mean, I don't love that terminology, but just any thoughts?
Or chokecherry, which is a food, but it's also used to make sweat houses, tules, and if you have this diverse, healthy floodplain, you're going to have habitat for different birds and wildlife. Obviously riparian areas are a great source of wildlife diversity. And so we recognize there's other benefits. We're clearly calling attention to these foods, but if you think about it ecologically, there are others that are going to benefit. And there's even, I think, a huge song about that. And my father was a drummer and a singer, and he was an artist as well. And he drew a picture about that song with a man singing on the bank of the river. Under the water line, you see the salmon coming, but in the sky are the swallows ahead of the salmon. So there's recognition. There's a relationship between the phenology of the landscape, you know, and the flows and the fish returns, and it's a pretty damn good indicator of when we're getting good returns in the basin. When another one was when the ants are flying, it's time to go harvest lamprey. So there's people see these different relationships, and they over time, and they maintain that. So there's a great deal of diversity you can provide for, you know, like we're looking at pollinators. As you know, I think that's amazing work. Like to think that there's a ground dwelling bumblebee that pollinates huckleberry that we didn't know about 3 years ago, 4 years ago. So yeah, there's just building off the ecology of the serving order, you can find a lot of relations.
Thank you. Let's go to Vice Chair Hatfield-Hyde and then Commissioner Labhart.
Director Glimpse, I really thank you for this presentation today. I think I've been taking little scratch notes all over the place. It's powerful, it's soulful, it's connected, and it's inclusive. When it, you know, Commissioner King is always reminding us that this is, all of this is about people as well. And I think what's uncomfortable about the way we silo natural resource management is, you know, the serving order is very grounding. The people in a way that they can understand their responsibility. So it's a relationship. It's very powerful. And I think it's a very cool way to show the, you know, I'll often get frustrated with work I've done in the Klamath Basin where we will focus on something. You know, everybody will run and look at the river and not look at the uplands, or, you know, it's just, that's maybe not a very good example, but I just think this is an incredibly powerful presentation, and I honor you for beginning to translate this. I think you said you started to translate this outward like in 2006. Is that when you started to have the framework that's, I mean,
2007.
Yeah, that's, I thank you for creating the framework so you could share it in a way that is so clear to others, you know, outside of the tribes as well. So, I don't know, I just feel very grateful for this presentation. It's excellence in the we will keep at it, and this kind of thing is grounding. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you, and I appreciate your last comment. I just wanted to thank you for pointing out the inclusivity of it. That was one of my goals. Was I never thought it was helpful to talk about culture in a way that kind of says we're different and you can't understand this. That's not helpful to either of us, right? So trying to frame it in a way where people can understand it. And again, I think we all relate to foods. And I talk about the power of foods, like, you know, foods bring us together in many ways. You know, it could be the way people celebrate a birthday. It could be Thanksgiving. It could be a root feast. But people have in their own kind of rituals around it. And so I think we relate to that. And then when we recognize that these first foods are also, again, native species in Oregon, and we can say, well, we have shared goals around these. We have shared interests in these. We can collaborate. So.
Yeah, and just one more comment on that. Thank you for being inclusive and finding a way for everybody to be a part of it. It's critical. I was just thinking, Director Colbert, of like, I don't know, I have the Department of Agriculture's seasonal harvest of, I don't know what it is, vegetables or something. It's put up in my on my back porch. It just makes me realize, you know, how grounding it would be to have that as a shared thing for Oregon, of how precious all of this is and how connected it is. You know, put it in a visual. Anyway, I will stop talking, and I thank you so much. And we certainly enjoyed our tour up there this summer, where we got to see that stretch of river that you guys were able to move away from the bank where the railroad had gone.
Mm-hmm.
And to know that already that habitat is being used by fish. I mean, how great is that? And how many places in Oregon can we do that? Like, how great is that?
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's go to Commissioner Labhart and then Commissioner Hall DeFries. If we have another minute, I have one other question, but let's do those two first. Go ahead, Commissioner Labhart.
You're muted.
Sorry about that. So Eric, I've had the pleasure of hearing your presentation now for the second time when you gave it to the OWEB board and at the Umatilla. And so it's stuck in even more with me. I mainly have comments, not questions. So I think the strength of your presentation is, this could be a research paper that you could have sightings and all of this and, you know, scientific data and all of that. But I think the strength of it is in the storytelling. You've told a story that ties the first foods to the ecosystem that we all live in and enjoy, and we all, most of us, a lot of us care about, and how we can tie that all together with our ability to hear a story that brings it to closure on how we're all tied together with nature. And so Dr. King talked a little bit about this, and I was going to actually ask a question about it, and it was related to the forest plan. And just a second, I've got a call coming in here. I'm trying to get rid of related to the Blue Mountain Forest Plan, and it got stalled the first time around, and now it's in the second iteration, and I understand it's stalling again. But what I would offer for that for you is, you know, is the term I use a lot is relentless engagement. By you giving this presentation, you've talked to our commission about it and tied it together, and it's being well received by our commissioners. It's also being, I think, well received by the folks on YouTube that watch our meetings, and they're picking up on it too. And so I think the strength of it is the storytelling and how we can collaborate and work together with that story that you're telling, that people will relate to it. And so don't give up with the federal government. keep relentless engagement because I think the story is very powerful. It does tell, I'm sorry, I'm struggling just a little bit, but if you understand what I'm trying to say is it's so powerful that through the storytelling that eventually people will accept, wow, this is really good. This is what we should be doing. This is how we do it. Let's work together collaboratively. We're not working against each other. We're trying to solve problems of mutual interest, and it relates to the first foods. It relates to how water all the way through the process of plants and animals and fish and all of that come to conclusion with the ecosystems that we care about out there. So my advice or counsel to you is first, thank you for your presentation. And second is keep telling your story, keep telling it, and relentless engagement, because there are people out there that will care and listen to it, and it has a great message. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. And I'll say we do have a peer-reviewed publication in Ecology and Society, and I'll send that along as well. We did it 10 years into our mission, so we documented our experience under the first 10 years, and we talk about the transferability of this approach to others, other tribes, and to other management agencies.
So maybe that'll, for the people who like facts and figures, they'll like that. I kind of like the story myself.
I try to balance both because when you talk about cultural values, I want to do it in a way that we can talk about how we can apply it in a practical sense to me, so that it's more useful, I guess. So I try to do.
Thank you.
Come in front of the commission, it's hard to not just singularly focus on that topic right in front of you because there's so much information, but just a good reminder to keep in mind that the decisions that we make, have impacts in different areas geographically and ecologically and culturally even. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Commissioner. On that map of the graphics, it makes me think of, I mentioned our forest management, but we also manage range units on the reservation. And a lot of those, the distribution of that couch is across the rangelands. But we changed the management from what was occurring historically was season-long grazing from April to October. And we changed it to, rotation grazing. We're focusing on annual grasses early in the season, and then resting those units and rotating livestock. And we're starting to see some gains, I think, in like native perennial bunch grasses. We also worked with Brian Interest at Oregon State University to look at the timing of typical rangeland surveys. You may be familiar with this, but historically, they would do surveys in, say, June because they were looking for what's the peak grass production. But in doing surveys, then they're missing a lot of the cultural food plants that are expressed much earlier in the growing season. So if you do your surveys earlier in the season or add some earlier in the season, you'll better capture the diversity of the grasslands, and you'll capture those cultural food plants. And then you can think about management strategies that allow for those food plants to persist or improve while you do grazing. And so, you know, as you know, annual grasses are a huge challenge, and it'll take a long time, but we're seeing some progress in our range units. And I guess part of my point is we're not saying, you know, I think our approach allows for things like forest management and grazing. We're not saying don't do that. We're saying consider these resources when you do it and then develop strategies. So thanks.
Thank you. One last question about you mentioned that if we get stalled in the next 3 years with the federal work, that creates perhaps some open doors to do more work tribal jointly with state of Washington, state of Oregon. Could you talk just a little bit more about that, especially if you have some examples in your head about where that work could start out?
Well, sure. Again, I would reference, all the effort we put into the Columbia Basin Restoration Initiative, where we identified some goals and some strategies. But I think of, more direct links you could make. I imagine, for example, like in a OWEB funding solicitation, you could have the touchstones be criteria against which proposals are assessed, right? Like, how are you addressing hydrology? Maybe they're leasing in-stream flows, or they're securing a in-stream flow right. Are they addressing connectivity, geomorphology? And you could, through that kind of solicitation, you could get projects that respond to those, and we'd be working in the same direction there. And I think as you get into lower in the basins, areas where we work, for example, a lot of the work historically has been in the headwaters or in the upper basins, but we have very poor juvenile fish survival lower in the basins of the Grand Ronde, the Umatilla, the Walla Walla. So starting to work with agriculturalists, and like we did with the landowner in Birch Creek, and maybe promoting conservation easements where they can still own the land, but we can do some of this floodplain restoration and start to piece together portions of the floodplain where these processes are reestablished. And that's something where we could probably benefit from some state involvement, encouraging that kind of collaboration.
Thank you.
Water, in-stream flows, applying for in-stream flows. ODF&W can do that, obviously, and then OWRD would approve them. I just work through the serving order and I come up with different examples. But
thank you. That's real helpful. And thank you again for this entire presentation. It's really a rich, powerful presentation. I think we need to go back to Davia now to see if there's anything we need to do just to close. Then we'll take a quick break and come back for the next presentation from Professor Miller.
Thanks, Chair Wall. I think we just expressed incredible gratitude for sharing this with us today, sharing your time and your the culture. I think it's a big deal that CTUIR is willing to share this with us, and we really appreciate you.
Thank you. I want to say again to all the commissioners, I appreciate this much time on your agenda and the opportunity, and look forward to collaborating with you.
Great. Thank you.
Commissioners, we've got a break for you. So Eric, you are welcome to stay for the rest of the training if you'd like, and see Professor Miller, but you don't have to.
I will do that, and I will get you a PDF that you can distribute. Thank you.
Awesome. And so Chair Wall, I'll send it back to you if you are ready to go to the break.
We are ready to go to the break. If we could be back in 5 minutes, commissioners, we'll start again. So 10:07. Thank you.
and everything. And that's why it's called the Fred Meyer Drainage. And that's where I'm sitting this morning, in the Portland metro area, kind of just south of the Portland, Oregon, within the Willamette Basin, which is 50% of the population of the state.
Well, I thought you were making a joke about the drainage, but I mean, I know Portland very well. Where are you located? On Columbia Boulevard, or you said south?
No. So it's in Clackamas. So if you come south on 205, so it's actually in the southern suburbs. So more Oregon City area where the Clackamas and the Willamette meet. So the Fred Meyer Drainage is actually of the Clackamas. So it's literally, if you know 205, it's exit 12A. And all of that shopping center right there when you come to 12.
Not 12B, not 12B?
No, 12A. 12A. So if you're coming, the reason you want 12A, it's Highway 212, which goes through Damascus into eventually Estacada and the Clackamas River Canyon, going to Mount Hood that way.
I literally drove by there this summer because one of the professor's husbands owns a farm right there on the Clackamas. And I was out at the farm just this past summer.
Yeah, so you were not far away. So that's where I am, like literally it's blurred, but the back window would be when you go to the lower part of this office, as you go down the hill into the floodplain, that's all the Fred Meyer Drainage, which is why the Coho were so hammered here for so long. But it's a different story now, thanks to OWEB and the Clackamas FIP, which is the Focus Investment Partnership.
Thank you.
Okay.
And we have one more, Commissioner Hall DeFries.
Good morning. I am located in Baker County, Oregon.
Baker County, is that Burns?
No, it is, we're east of Burns by about 3 hours.
East of Burns.
She's way out there.
We're closer to Idaho. We border Idaho. The eastern part of the county borders Idaho.
Well, I've flown around and driven the Steens Mountains several times, so yes.
He lives up by Sumter.
Yeah.
Sumter. Oh, that's where the old drilling mill is out there sitting on the ground, right? Or whatever
That's
it's
right.
called. Drill platform or something.
The dredge. Uh-huh.
Yes, I took a mining class at Eastern Oregon State University and we drove around and saw it.
Oh, yeah. Yep. That's where I met.
Okay. I've now lost the screen. Oh, there you are.
Director Colbert, have you introduced yourself to Professor Miller?
Good morning, Professor Miller. I'm Debbie Colbert. I'm the Director of the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, and just want to say thank you for being here with us today. Look forward to your presentation.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. Someone's going to have to.
You go right ahead. That's it on the introduction. So if you'd like to go right ahead, that would be terrific. We look forward to hearing from you.
When I've got a short introduction, Chair Wall, just to say thank you so much to Professor Miller for joining us this morning. He was recommended by multiple of the tribal attorneys that I reached out to about who might be a good resource for you all. So we're grateful that he said yes and is spending some time with us. So he's going to speak with us about the basics of tribal sovereignty and treaty and property rights. He's the Jonathan and Wendy Rose Professor of Law at the Sandra Day O'Connor College of Law at Arizona State University. He has expertise in federal Indian law, American Indians and international law, American Indian economic development, constitutional law, and civil procedure. He's a citizen of the Eastern Shawnee tribe and serves as a judge for multiple tribes around the country, including the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde here in Oregon. And he has strong Oregon connections, having been on faculty at Lewis and Clark Law School for many years. So he has many articles, books, chapters, and editorials on federal Indian law issues, and he speaks regularly on these issues in the U.S. and in other countries. So we are really grateful. He has said that he would love to be interrupted with questions if you have them in the moment, and we'll try to catch those with hands raised and that kind of thing. But thanks so much for being here. And were you going to say you want us to share your slides?
Well, yes, I tried to open it. I'm not familiar with Teams, so how do I open my own? It's on my desktop.
At the top of your screen, you should see like a rectangle with an arrow in it pointing up that says the word share in the Teams window.
Oh, there it is. Yes.
Yeah.
screen, window, or tab. Is that? Well,
And then
that-
it should show you from there. You could share your screen, or if you hit window, you can share the PowerPoint window that you have open.
Well, I've got, can you see what I see? I have a blank screen. It's not choose what to share. Let's see, window, entire screen. It's not showing me my own desktop.
Is it off? Try hitting window, and then you can choose from within there.
I click on it, but it's just blank. There's nothing there. There's just the picture of you.
Is your presentation open in PowerPoint?
Yes.
Okay. Would you
Yeah.
like Michelle to put it up for you from our end?
Yes, let's not waste more time on that.
Okay.
Yeah, I've only used Teams a few times. Well, here's share. Here's a share button. Oh. Yeah, that's not going to work. Okay, so you got it on your end. That's why I sent it to you. So
There you go.
okay. Now, if I cancel this, okay, there we are. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm delighted to be here. I was born and raised in Portland, Oregon, and lived there for 61 years. I went to Eastern Oregon State University. Somebody's from over there. It's now Eastern Oregon University. Someone's from Siletz. I represented the Coquille tribe on their housing department, so I was down south there. Practiced Indian law for 4 years before I became a professor. And I have been, my God, including the 6 years I was an adjunct professor at Lewis and Clark Law School. I've been a professor since 1993. So you can see behind me the clean office I have. I was going to clean it up, but I thought, hey, come on, that's too much trouble. And this just shows you how busy a busy professor is or how messy I am. Okay, so she mentioned I am on the Court of Appeals for the Grand Ronde tribe. So I have to be very careful not to, get into kind of a conflict issue. I'm pretty certain you folks are facing issues among even the Oregon tribes about UNA sites, usually on the custom fishing sites. So I'm not going to give you any commentary on that. We'll talk historical and what the Supreme Court has held. So I'm ready to talk about that. But I am not giving legal opinions or legal advice. Yes, I'm still an active Oregon lawyer, but I am not representing you folks. And I cannot speak to anything that involves Grand Ronde. So I'm sorry if that is a limiting factor, but okay, first slide, please. So what am I going to talk? Well, the first slide shows my outline. Hit the button, please. And hit it again and again and again, please. I think I have 4 bullet points here. So I'm going to talk about these aspects. Tribes as governments, tribes in the Constitution as they've always been. And so I want to drive home this point very strongly. When you're dealing with Indian people as citizens of a federally recognized tribe, it's not DEI. It's not diversity, inclusion, or inclusion issues. It is constitutionally mandated government-to-government relationships between the United States and tribal nations. And I have a slide on here. I have 2 slides, in fact, about Oregon. So you folks are commissioners for an Oregon department. There are many Oregon statutes about Oregon's relationship with the 9 federally recognized tribes in Oregon. And to let you know who said that, well, Baker, yeah, I'm thinking further south. Burns is where I know about. There's a Nevada tribe whose territory spills over into Oregon. So there's literally 10 tribes that have land, recognized land and rights in the state of Oregon. So then I'll end up with consultation because you folks have consultation duties as mandated by Oregon law. But what I do want to drive home to you is that states do not have a political relationship with tribes, not mandated by the Constitution, not mandated by the Supreme Court. I'll show you these cases in just a moment, but we call it federal Indian law because the relationship in the United States and throughout history has always just been with the tribal nations and the federal government. The states have no role or voice in Indian law affairs. That's why we call it federal Indian law and federal Indian policies, etc. But more and more states have gotten active and some very positive steps. Oregon has taken some positive steps, and what I will show you, starting with Governor Kitzhaber, I literally spoke at Governor Kotek's consultation last year at Cow Creek Reservation. I gave an hour talk similar to what I'm talking to you today, and I was surprised that the governor sat there and listened very attentively the whole time. Usually the big politicians are off in the back room, right? Okay, well, let's get started. Next bullet, please. I cannot give a talk anymore without pointing this out. General George Washington wrote a letter to the Articles of Confederation Congress. If you're not up to date on the U.S. history, we've had three forms of federal government. The Continental Congress fought the Revolutionary War, and it had no written document as to its powers and what it could do. It was a very informal body that the states just sent representatives to. Finally, in 1781, we draft the Articles of Confederation government, and it had written documents, the Articles of Confederation. Truly, it was a constitution. And now we live under the Constitution of the United States. George Washington sworn into office March 4, 1789, under that new Constitution that was drafted in 1787. That's what we'll be focusing on. But George Washington, he was a general at the time. We just won the Revolutionary War. We just had signed the treaty with England, and England had recognized that we were in existence and England would not invade us, at least not for a week or two. So the Congress, Articles of Confederation Congress, asked George Washington for advice. He wrote a 4-page letter, and you can find this letter on the National Archives. So if you want to double check what I've written here, you type in George Washington and that date, you will have the actual letter from the National Archives in 1 second. So he writes his 4-page letter of advice to the Congress. On page 4, he turns to Indian affairs, and he defines Indians as savages, and he compares them to animals. Now, the reason I can't, even to talk like today, why am I starting with this? Because this is what federal Indian policy has been from the beginning: to dominate, maybe even to exterminate, but certainly to move Indian peoples out of the ways of this growing United States. What is American Manifest Destiny about? It's this God-driven destiny that Euro-Americans would cross the continent and Indian peoples would just have to magically disappear. So this is page 4, and he's talking about Indians. Next bullet point, please. I'll let you read this. It's a little longer. And you can see what George is talking about, plainly discussing what we came to call manifest destiny in 1845. That's the first time I believe that research shows that we use this phrase, manifest destiny. An editorial writer wrote about it. Okay, I shouldn't belabor this too much, should I? But I just can't talk about this stuff without getting into George Washington. But look what he says. So it's cheaper to buy Indian lands than to fight them. He says it's like driving the animals away, and they'll just return. So next slide, please. Now, I hope that sends a little chill down your spine. You can see why the letter is called The Savage is the Wolf letter. He's analogizing human being Indian peoples to animals. And that, boy, we better sign treaties with them because if we fight wars with them, it'll be never ending. And look what he said, both being beasts of prey, though they differ in shape. I hope you know what the word prey means. So the United States was hunting Indian peoples. Well, what they were hunting, of course, was the land, the assets, the minerals, the timber, the water. So anyway, now that I've started us off on such a pleasant... Anyway, let's move on. Next slide, please. Sorry, I just can't give this talk anymore without pointing that out. So the Articles of Confederation Congress that I mentioned to you was the second form of national government that we had. It governed this country from 1781 until 1789, and the new Constitution took effect, and George Washington and John Adams were sworn in on March the 4th, 1789. Here's a statute that Articles of Confederation Congress enacted in 1787. It was about the Old Northwest. The Old Northwest are the 5 states of Ohio, Illinois, Indiana, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. That's what used to be called the Northwest. The promise the United States would never take Indian lands and property. And I underline the word property because that's what we're going to be talking about. Treaty rights create property rights. And the United States cannot take property rights without paying for it. So you folks are on the Fish and Wildlife Commission. You're dealing with extremely difficult issues of salmon runs and other issues. And the salmon runs are being listed, have been listed for decades now under the Endangered Species Act. How do you manage that? Who gets to fish? How much do they get to catch, etc.? Hit the next bullet point, please. And Congress specifically applied that statute about the Old Northwest to the Oregon Country, where I was born and raised and where you all are sitting right now in 1848. So this same promise was reaffirmed for Native peoples. We will deal fairly and honorably with you. And what did George say? Let's do it by treaties. Let's do it by agreements instead of war. Next slide, please. And am I talking to Michelle? I'd like to use your name. Is that, it says Michelle Tate up here? Okay, so.
Yes, Bob, I'll be advancing your slide.
Thank you. So next point, please. So you've all heard of the Commerce Clause, the Interstate Commerce Clause. How many of you knew that Indian nations are mentioned in there? When the Supreme Court decides a case about Indian law and trade, etc., they call this clause the Indian Commerce Clause. And the Supreme Court has cited this provision, my God, I've never done the research, but probably 100 times in deciding cases about Indian tribes' rights, powers, etc. So I want you to read this very carefully. That's the quote. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3 is the Interstate Commerce Clause. Here's another reason we call it federal Indian law. Congress shall have the power to regulate commerce with, and notice I underlined that word, foreign nations, among the several states and with the Indian tribes. Now, I'm no English professor, so I guess those are called prepositions. What is the word with there and among? But I can't help but notice that the founding fathers of the Constitution, and James Madison is credited with drafting this provision, and very little amendments happened to it at the Constitutional Convention. All the founding fathers realized that Indian affairs had to be federal and that Congress would have this power. But I point out the with and the among, and I argue that Congress and the founding fathers, excuse me, not Congress, there was no Congress yet, no Congress under the United States Constitution, but the founding fathers intended that tribes were governments. They understood tribes were governments and that Congress would be the body to deal with them. Again, that's why we call it federal Indian law. Next provision, next click, please, Michelle. I think there's something more at the bottom of this one. Nope. So that's the only reference to Indian tribes in the Constitution. But I will show you the treaty clause in a moment. And obviously, tribes were included in the treaty clause. So that implicates, by implication, Article 6 of the Constitution is a reference to Indian tribes. Indian peoples are mentioned twice in the Constitution. And I emphasize this to you because what the founding fathers think about Native peoples. I mean, there were lots of tribes inside the original 13 colonies. The state of New York, all sorts of tribes there. South Carolina, Georgia, in the 1770s, there were tribes in every one of the 13 colonies. But were they citizens? Were they U.S. or state citizens? And the answer clearly is no. And so the point I'm making is founding fathers understood that Indian peoples were citizens of their own governments, and they were not state or federal citizens. So you may know, why do we do the census every 10 years, folks? This is the provision setting out the requirement to do the census. We do that every 10 years to find out the population of each state, to find out how many congressmen and women each state gets. Today, you get one congressperson for every 600,000 population. So what is Oregon? Do we have, 5 congress people now, or is it even more?
6 now.
How many?
6.
6, okay. Idaho has, I think, only 1. I know Montana and Wyoming only have 1, and North and South Dakota because they don't have above a 1.2 million population. Anyway, I digress. Back then, you got a
Hey,
Congress.
hey, Bob, I see a hand up.
Well, I
Commissioner
think
King.
Yeah,
Question?
thank you, Davia. Yeah. What strikes me is what's not underlined in your slide, excluding Indians, non-tax, and 3/5 of all other persons. That means the people that look like me. And they did it because of what you're mentioning. They needed the numbers. They wanted to have the 3/5 clause so that they would count for the census and they could get more representation in Congress. That's
Who
what
wanted
was
that
all
number?
about.
Oh, now I'm sounding
Meaning
like a law
people.
professor. We ask questions.
Well,
Let me address that. Now, the reason
James
I
Madison in
underlined,
particular, he's a native Virginian like I was and a slave owner, meaning he owned people who look like me. So he wanted 3/5, he wanted more of a count so they get more numbers in Congress. That was intentional.
what do you think the South wanted? 3/5 or count every enslaved person as a full person?
Well, first of all, we would have to be considered people to be counted as people, and we were not. so they could that logic broke down really quick.
Well, let me
So,
continue. Let me continue.
No worries.
This is one of the great compromises of the U.S. Constitution, because exactly what you said, the South wanted to count every enslaved person as one full person because that would give the South more congressmen. Back then, they were all men. The North goes, no way, you consider those people property. You would give them no rights whatsoever. So there was a great battle over how to count the enslaved people of the South. And you point out very accurately that this gave the South more congressmen, but they would have liked a lot more, wouldn't they? So they would have liked to have counted the enslaved people as one person. The reason I don't have it underlined is because my talk's on Indian issues. And so what I'm pointing out here is that Indians were not counted at all. Also, why? Well, I put a positive spin on this because they were citizens of their own countries, their tribes. And so, folks, if no one here is a tribal citizen, let me tell you something. I have more citizenships than you do. I'm a U.S. citizen. I'm now a citizen of Arizona. Doggone it. Wish I was still in Oregon. And I'm a citizen of the Eastern Shawnee tribe. So with that comes rights. With that comes obligations and duties to my tribe and my government, et cetera. And being defined as an Indian, lots of federal laws apply to me that do not apply to you. And the point I started out with, it's not race-based. It's not DEI. It's not some kind of invidious racial discrimination when Congress passes laws about tribes, et cetera. It's based on Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3, and the status of tribes as governments. And so when you hear the phrase federally recognized tribe, there are hundreds of groups in the United States that claim they should be federally recognized. So they may have Indian blood, they may have DNA, and so they might be native people by DNA, by heritage. But if they're not a member of a federally recognized tribe, they do not fall in the definition of Indian as we use it in federal Indian law and as the founding fathers intended. Okay, so what did the founding fathers think? Hey, unless you paid taxes, and there's no discussion on this phrase and what it meant. I have looked at the records of the Constitutional Convention, May to September 1787 in Philadelphia. No discussion. So this was not controversial, but it also leaves us a little bit of, gosh, what does it mean? So we just got to take it at face value. Indians, unless they paid taxes, were not state citizens and not to be counted in the census. Next slide, please, Michelle, because what did happen after the Civil War? Well, this is the 14th Amendment. Hit it again, please. And don't hit it again. Okay, take that one back, please. Take that one back, please. Thank you. So into the Civil War, Congress passes the Civil War Amendments, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, granting to the recently enslaved people full-fledged rights of citizenship. Now that 3/5 provision is dropped, just count everyone. But how are Indians still considered in 1868? So the founding fathers, if you want to use that phrase, of this amendment still repeated that thinking from 1787 that Indian peoples are citizens of their own governments just because they accidentally live inside, the state of Georgia or Oklahoma or whatever. They're not to be counted in the census. Okay, why am I driving that home? Because of the political existence and difference of Indian peoples. And I repeat again, it's not DEI. It's politics and diplomacy and the role, the constitutional role of government, of the Congress, and obligation to deal with tribal nations. Next point slide, Michelle, not slide, it's just a point. So in 1884, Mr. Elk was living in Kansas and he wanted to vote in the state elections. And he said, I'm a citizen. Look what the 14th Amendment, I don't have it all here, folks. There's 5 sections to the 14th Amendment, and you all know the birthright citizenship clause that is currently going to be litigated to the Supreme Court. I think November 5th, the Supreme Court's going to hear argument on this. And certain administration is arguing that no, the children of illegal alien immigrants cannot be called citizens. I'm quoting this from memory now. But we adopted birthright citizenship in the 14th Amendment in 1868. Any person born within any state of the United States is automatically a citizen. And a certain administration is fighting that right now. But so Indian peoples were born inside the United States, weren't they? Shouldn't they have been citizens under the 14th Amendment? My mother was born in 1923, Native person. Was she a citizen of the United States? Probably not. So Mr. Elk sues to get to vote. And the U.S. Supreme Court, even though they read that birthright citizenship, even though they go, we know Mr. Elk was born inside the United States, but we do not think the 14th Amendment applies to him. Why? Because he's a citizen of his own government. I've read the debates on the floor of the Senate and the House when they were considering adopting the 14th Amendment. What would birthright citizenship do to Indians? There was a fair amount of discussion. You can read it today. Some senators said, hey, you're going to make all Indians citizens. They're born inside the U.S. And others said, no, because they owe their allegiance. And I'm almost quoting what one senator said. They owe their allegiance to their own government and not to either the states or the United States. So the Supreme Court affirmed that Indian peoples were not made citizens by birthright citizenship. The Trump administration has mentioned this provision in their early argument about birthright citizenship. I doubt they will make that argument to the U.S. Supreme Court because of this political situation of tribes, but they might even make a big deal about this in front of the Supremes, and I think the oral argument is November 5th. Michelle, next point, please. So by the time my mother was 1, she was made a citizen of the United States. Woohoo! Because Congress passed a law in 1924 that all Indians are U.S. citizens. There's still 1 or 2 tribes today that claim we never consented to that. We don't want to be U.S. citizens and we're not U.S. citizens. Well, I hate to tell them they are U.S. citizens, whether they like it or not. But many states didn't allow tribal peoples to vote for decades. Arizona, right where I'm at, New Mexico, Maine did not allow Indians to vote in state elections until 1967, folks, because the state of Maine is saying, hey, you're an Indian, you're a citizen of your own tribe, don't vote in our state elections. Interesting. Okay, next provision, please, Michelle. Okay, here's next point. This is the treaty clause of the next point, please. And I'll let you read that. So this is called the Supremacy Clause of the Constitution. That's probably where you've heard of it, but it's also the Treaty Clause. The U.S. Constitution, federal laws, and any treaty the federal government makes is the supreme law of the land. And what I left out is the provision, and I can quote it to you, and state judges are bound thereby, by the Constitution, the U.S. laws, and the treaties, U.S. treaties, and the state judges are bound thereby, notwithstanding what it might say in the state constitution or in state law. Now, I ran out. I didn't quote that exactly. My memory's not as good as it used to be, but I left that part out because that's not that relevant. But wow, when the Constitution says something about Indian tribes, when Congress passes a law that says something about Indian tribes and Indian peoples, or a tribe has a treaty, it's the supreme law over what a state might try to do to the contrary. So this is relevant to the state of Oregon. And when it comes to fish issues and the salmon, which we're going to talk about in a moment, these are federal court issues. And the state of Oregon has to do what the federal courts decide because of the supremacy clause. So I've given you some background to understand what tribes are and what, well, let me make one more point about that. The term federally recognized tribes. Some people make a joke about that. Someone I even know who's probably related to me, she says it's the federal rec process. WRECK is how she's using it. Well, I don't view it that way. The idea that the federal government deals with a tribal group that it recognizes as a government, it's no different than what the United States does when there's a new country in the world, for example. I believe there's a civil war going on in Yemen now. If Yemen breaks into North and South Yemen, like there's North and South Korea, and there used to be North and South Vietnam, will the United States and will the world recognize that there are two Yemens? Will they be given a seat at the UN? Will they be given a vote? Will the U.S. send an ambassador and build a embassy in both countries? That is the feds recognizing what is a government in the world that it will have a political relationship with. And I think that's exactly analogous to the United States deciding what is a historical tribal group, been around since time immemorial, and the Fed should have a legal, political relationship with that group. So that's how I perceive the federal recognition process. Next slide, please. So the Indian peoples are mentioned twice in the Constitution. I just showed them to you. Please go back, Michelle. I didn't make this point. Tribes are mentioned once, but there's no question that tribes are implicated and referenced by implication in the treaty clause. And let me tell you why. Why did I underline those words? Boy, we're going to do a little statutory construction right now, folks. Us lawyers do. Break every word down. What does it mean and how do you read it? All treaties made. Now, if that's all it said, if that next 5 words were not in there, I'm going to test you. What do you think? What would that mean? Would that only mean treaties going forward from when the Constitution was written or when it became effective on March the 4th, 1789? That would be a very logical reading of it. All treaties made. One would think, well, it's prospective, future treaties. But look how it changes the clause to add those next 5 words. All treaties made or which shall be made. That's now a future-looking provision. So what the Founding Fathers mean by those 3 words, all treaties made? Well, I've done the research, folks, so let me tell you. By the time this Constitution became effective and our current United States began operating under it, the United States had signed 32 treaties. 23 with foreign countries like Russia, Morocco, England, Holland, France. And they had signed 9 treaties with Indian tribes, my tribe included, the 1786 treaty that the Shawnee people signed with the United States. So that is without any question, all treaties made is a past tense reference to the treaties that the Continental Congress and the Articles of Confederation Congress had already signed. And now the Constitution says, oh, yeah, and any treaty we sign from here on. You know, if any of you disagree with me, send me an email, but I think that is pretty plain. And so that's why the Founding Fathers added those next 5 words. They were ratifying the treaties that the U.S. had already signed. Heck, we borrowed money from Holland. We borrowed money from France to fight our Revolutionary War. Yeah, we're going to still pay you off. That's still a binding treaty on the U.S. Okay, next provision, Michelle, please. Next point. Okay, I want to just show you these 2 opinions very quickly. These are written by our most famous Chief Justice John Marshall. The Cherokee Nation versus Georgia decision in 1831 laid out the trust responsibility, the duty the United States has to protect tribal peoples, protect tribal nations, and to protect their assets and their lands. Next bullet point, please. This case is famous. What the issue here was whether the Cherokee Nation was the equivalent of an international country, and could it sue Georgia directly in the United States Supreme Court? And the court said no. Tribes are not international governments. They are domestic, dependent nations inside the U.S. and subject to its control. So that's a pretty famous phrase. Whether you like it, tribes like it or not, that's what the Supreme Court held. And this idea of the trust responsibility. Indian peoples and the tribes are like a ward, and the guardian is the United States. So the United States has a duty to tribes. Next point, please. So this case was the very next year. Next point, please. Mr. Wooster was a missionary who was on the Cherokee Reservation in Georgia. And the state of Georgia arrested him, sentenced him to 4 years of hard labor because he went onto the reservation without the permission of the governor of Georgia. So Mr. Wooster sues, case goes to the U.S. Supreme Court. He says, Georgia can't control whether I go inside the Cherokee Reservation. And so this is what the Supreme Court said. Yes, tribes have put themselves under the protection of the U.S., but look what it says. Such engagements, treaties, do not divest them, the Cherokee, of the right of self-government, nor destroy their capacity to enter treaties or compacts, agreements. Next bullet point, please. Coming under the protection of the United States does not imply the destruction. Next bullet point, please. And literally in both these cases, Cherokee Nation in 1831 and Wooster in 1832, Chief Justice John Marshall said, we have acted towards tribes in a political situation from the beginning, and repeated treaties with tribes demonstrate that tribes are nations. And I should have given you this other clause, and I can pretty much quote this. He said, we use the words nation and treaties towards the Indians in the same sense we use it to any other country of the world. So he was driving home the point that the U.S. had always dealt with tribes on a political basis. My tribe signed 11 treaties with the United States. The Cherokee probably signed like 15 treaties with the United States. And that reinforces what Chief Justice Marshall said here. Okay, next point, please. Next point. Next point. Next point. So you can read these three very quickly. This is a famous, pretty important attorney in Indian law, wrote a book in 1841. He worked for the Department of Justice. They directed him to write a book and make some sense out of the Indian law. And he came up with these three fundamental principles. Congress has plenary power over Indian tribes. And in my class, I go citation to authority. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3. That's the branch of the federal government that has this power under the Indian Commerce Clause, the Interstate Commerce Clause, to control tribal affairs. Congress can do almost anything good or anything bad it wants against tribal nations. It's not race-based, so there's not strict scrutiny, if you know what that means in the law, where a court looks really closely at what Congress just did. No, what the Supreme Court has held, because of Congress's political relationship with tribes, and because of Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3, we give very deferential review to what the Congress does for or against tribal peoples. And so in my class, like I say, I say strict scrutiny is like looking at the law under a microscope. And federal laws usually can't pass muster if a court looks at it that closely. But when Congress legislates in regards Indian peoples and Indian law and Indian nations, the Supreme Court steps back across the room and they just ask, gosh, is there any rational basis for Congress passing that law based on its duty towards Native people? And governments almost always win if it's rational basis review. So why am I, you can almost have to come to law school and take my con law class next semester. I just said some pretty deep stuff. But this shows, again, the position of tribes and Indians as individuals, citizens of their tribes vis-a-vis the United States. What's the next great provision? Tribes are still sovereigns, but they've lost some of their powers. I won't belabor that point. And the trust relationship that I already mentioned to you, the U.S. has a fiduciary duty. And so I'm, to tie this to what I'm going to talk to about later, the United States is supposed to protect tribal treaty rights. It's part of its trust responsibility. So for you folks, salmon probably is the big issue, and we haven't gotten to it yet. But the U.S. is supposed to be on the side of tribes and protecting tribal resources and tribal property rights set out in treaties. So we'll get into that in more depth. Next point, please. Hit all these buttons, please. This is just, again, I should have deleted this slide, but I had to fill 90 minutes too, right, folks? Some of you look familiar. I think, have I spoken to some of you before? Anyway, maybe everybody looks familiar to me now. Okay, interesting case from 1942. The United States, to make it easy on themselves, the treaty said they were supposed to pay the annual annuities to the tribal citizens. And instead, they gave it to the tribal council just because I suppose that was easier on the feds. They had to pay it a second time to the tribal citizens because they breached their duty to the tribal peoples. Look what the court said. The government is more than just a mere contracting party. The U.S. fails to recognize that there are certain equitable, and that means fairness, and the fiduciary duty. That language comes directly from Cherokee Nation versus Georgia we just looked at. And that last clause gets quoted in every article you've ever read on the trust responsibility. The U.S. has charged itself with moral obligations of the highest responsibility and trust. And judges should judge the federal actions by the most exacting fiduciary standards. Okay, there's a hand. Question?
Yeah, Bob, this is Mark. So, and you're going to talk about this later, maybe, but so all these treaties that we entered, the power of those treaties, and then we turned around and violated those treaties in many cases when supposedly this is the law of the land. So are you going to talk about that at all? About we enter treaties and then we turn around, we violate those treaties, or we did ignore those treaties? So.
Well, I can address that right now because I really wasn't planning on it, but what I will mention is that treaties represent property rights that tribal peoples own. And under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution, the United States no government can take property rights without paying just compensation, is what the Constitution says. So you may have all heard, I don't know how long you've been on the Fish Commission, but there is something called CRITFIC, the Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission, located in downtown Portland. 4 of the big treaty tribes that have rights in the Columbia River and the basin. Ted Strong used to be their executive director, and he threatened all the time to sue the United States for taking the salmon if they die out and if the runs die out. I don't know the dollar figure, folks, but we're going to get to this in a moment. The tribes have a right to take 50% of the harvest of those 5 runs of salmon that come back and forth 3 times a year. You all know this better than I do probably, and the steelhead. So there are 6 runs of fish that the tribes own property rights in. And so Ted Strong used to say, these dams kill off all our fish. We're going to sue the United States for takings. And tribes sue the United States all the time, Mark, for, yes, violations of treaties. Now, in the past, the U.S. probably got away with lots of things, and then maybe tribal peoples died out and there was nobody there to even sue. I'm not going to address those sorts of issues. But in the modern day, there's probably 3 or 4 trust responsibility lawsuits and treaty claims lawsuits going on at any one time. So tribes do sue the United States. They do make this Fifth Amendment taking claim. And if the salmon were to all die out, I think all these tribes would be bringing takings claims against the United States. So, okay. Now there's a happy note. But anyway, I don't mean to make light of it, but that's the reality of the law. Okay, next slide. I think we're finally going to get into what I'm supposed to be talking about. Next point. Okay, so the United States signed 375 treaties with tribes that were ratified by the Senate. So if you're unaware what the Constitution provides for, the executive branch and the president negotiate a treaty, and then the Senate has to ratify it by, it's a 2/3 or, my gosh, 3/4 vote. I think it's just 2/3. And so there are 375 treaties with tribes in those years. I said 11 with my tribe. Cherokee probably has more. You may be surprised that there's something like 249 tribes in Alaska. Not a one of the Alaskan tribes have a treaty. There's 118 federally recognized tribes in California. Only one tribe has a treaty. So as the United States swept across the country and got more and more powerful, and the tribes got weaker and less powerful, the U.S. really stopped doing treaty making. In 1871, Congress passed a law saying there will be no more treaties signed with Indian tribes. But the act absolutely says any existing treaty is still in full force and effect. So there will be no more treaties with tribes unless Congress were to change that law. That law is probably unconstitutional, folks, just for you to know, because the act of Congress cannot override the constitutional power that the president has with the Senate to ratify treaties. Many professors have made that comment. No one has ever brought a lawsuit about it. But I want to point this out, the commercial passenger fishing vessel case. This came out of the state of Washington. This is the seventh time the U.S. Supreme Court listened to claims by tribes about fishing rights in the Pacific Northwest, and the treaties that Governor Isaac I. Stevens signed with tribes 1853 to 1855. I probably have my slides a little out of order and maybe should have gone through Governor Stevens first and what the treaties say. But I'm just driving this home right now because of what this court said. 7-2 vote in the Supreme Court. Indian treaties are contracts between sovereign nations. And I left the word sovereign out because I ran out of room there. But I just looked at the case again yesterday. Indian treaties are the same as contracts between sovereign nations. So you have to comply with that, or you have to pay damages. Just as if you and I were signed a contract and one of us breached it, the other can sue for money damages. So tribes can sue the United States if they don't fulfill the promises that are in treaties. Next point, please, Michelle. Now, this is interesting. I said that the Governor Isaac I. Stevens, which were mostly about the tribes around Puget Sound and the Makah who went whaling out on the tip of Northwest Washington. The Supreme Court has heard cases 7 times. And I just told you that commercial passenger fishing vessel was the 7th. Well, the first was Winans, United States versus Winans, and it involved what are called UNAs. I'm sure you guys know what that is, but it's called the usual and accustomed sites. So the treaties that Governor Isaac I. Stevens, who was the governor of the Washington Territory, it was not yet a state. The Congress broke the Washington Territory off from the Oregon Territory. And so Isaac I. Stevens was the first governor of the territory. So he signed 10 treaties with this identical language. So all these tribes along the Puget Sound and then the Columbia River tribes have this identical language. They reserved for themselves. Now I want to drive that point home, folks. Winans is called the Reserved Rights Doctrine. Winans stands for what's called the Reserved Rights Doctrine. Tribal peoples, the U.S. didn't give tribes anything. The U.S. came wanting to buy land, wanting to buy assets, wanting to buy rights. It's the U.S. that wanted something. And the Winans case just made a statement that I make my class memorize. Let's see if I can memorize it or repeat it to you right now. Quote, a treaty is not a grant of rights to the Indians, but a grant of rights from the Indians, a reservation of those rights not granted, period, close quote. Do you see why we even call Indian lands a reservation? In Canada, they call the lands of the First Nations reserves, and it's the same idea. I'll talk to you in just a second, Becky. The tribes own 10 million acres, maybe. And the U.S. came and said, well, we'd like to buy a lot of that from you. And so the tribe agreed to reserve for itself 1 million acres. Well, it's incorrect to say that the U.S. gave the tribe that land or gave the tribe fishing rights on that land or timber rights or mineral rights. It's just ridiculous. The tribes already owned these rights. And so what does Winnan say? They reserved to themselves the rights they did not grant to the U.S. Becky? You're mute.
Yeah, gotcha. So I think what's, as it relates to the Stevens tribes and the treaties and the reserved rights, and I think if I mean, it can be kind of a difficult concept to fully wrap your head around for me. As it relates to sort of, let's say they have what we think of as a traditional Indian reservation, but they ceded another 8 million acres or something. And they are a Stevens tribe with the usual and accustomed places. And those usual and accustomed places are not part of their reservation. They're part of the ceded lands outside of the reservation. Just talk about that a little bit more, because that
Sure.
is, I think that's important, at least for me.
Someone's knocking my door. I'm on a podcast. Or I'm on a whatever Zoom call. Okay. This case answers all those questions very well. So in U.S. versus Winans, the Winnan brothers bought some property. I think it's at Lyle Point, Washington, folks. It's on the Washington side. Yakima Fisher people were walking across their backyard to get to usual and accustomed fishing sites. And the Winnan brothers said, hey, private property, you're trespassing. And they prevented the Indians from crossing. The United States, because of the trust responsibility, brought this lawsuit for the Yakima Nation. Look how skillfully I tied in why I mentioned the trust responsibility. Oh, I'm so clever. But the United States lived up to its responsibility to protect the fishing treaty rights of this tribe. And they sued the Winnan brothers. And they go, Winnans, we don't care that you own your land in fee simple absolute, because when you bought the land, it was subject to a pre-existing easement that the tribal people still owned. Now, I want to let that pause for a moment, folks. Why were the Winnans not in the right here? Because the treaty that the United States signed with the Yakima Nation is public record. It's part of federal law. And Mr. Winnans, you're deemed to know the law. Ignorance of the law is no excuse, folks. That's exactly what happened to the Winnans here. Yes, they received a fee simple title from the state of Washington, but it was subject to the easement for the Yakima people to get to their usual and accustomed site. So, Becky, to get to your point, most treaties, when a tribe sells, that 9 million and keeps only 1 million acres, most treaties, the tribe has almost no rights out in the ceded area. But these treaties specifically said that tribes could still fish in common with the citizens of the territory at all usual and accustomed sites. So this is called off-reservation treaty rights. And because the treaty is so clear, that Supreme Court has affirmed it 7 times that the tribes have rights under these treaties. And sorry, Winnans brothers, but you just have to watch Yakima people come across your backyard. And there are $1 million homes, multi-million-dollar homes at Lyle Point, where they have to look out their back door and watch Indian people walk across their backyard to fish. Yes, Becky.
So, but this is just in relation to the specific rights with the Stevens treaties. So is there any other that you can share with us in the United States? Are there any other treaties that were made that reserve or had this usual and accustomed language built in outside of these Stevens treaty tribes?
The 10 Stevens treaties, I think, are unique in using the phrase usual and custom. But many tribes in the Great Lakes area are allowed to go on lakes and to take wild rice. Their treaty literally says to take rice and to hunt and fish. And
Okay.
so a lot of Great Lake tribal people, they fish on the Great Lakes and the little lakes around, even though that's not within their reservation anymore. But right off the top of my head, that's the only other, well, I'll tell you my own tribe, but these are rights that we're not using anymore. Treaties that we signed with the United States when we were in Ohio and lands that we sold and other tribes, we reserved the right to take maple syrup from trees, literally. It said sugar, taking the sugar from the trees, or to fish and hunt. There have been a couple lawsuits by tribes claiming they should, tribes that are now in Oklahoma, they should still be allowed to fish in the Great Lakes. And those two cases that I'm aware of, they lost. So the only treaties I know of for certain that reserved off-reservation treaty rights are the Stevens treaties and the tribes in the Great Lakes area.
So if you are a Washington tribe and you have a Stevens treaty and you have reserved your hunting and fishing rights under the treaty to the usual and accustomed places, even if those places are in Oregon, Oregon might say, hey, tribe from Washington, go home. But the tribes have reserved that territory through their treaty. Right? Is that
Well,
correct?
I hesitate because I'm unaware of any Washington tribes still claiming sites in Oregon. But I mean, the Yakima might cross the river and fish on the south side. It depends on historical evidence. What was a UNA? And I will get into that in a moment with you all.
Okay, I'll stop.
But, well, yeah, no, I didn't mean anything like that. Thank you for your questions. But I sort of did this in reverse. The language in the treaty, ought to just read Winans someday, folks. And that clause that I quoted you, that I just tell my class, memorize this. It is incorrect to say the U.S. gave tribes anything. The tribes reserved rights they already owned and kept them. And what they sold to the U.S., yeah, they probably don't have any right to anymore. So most tribes do not have rights off their reservations because their treaty, they didn't make that kind of a reservation of rights. But so remember, Winans is case number 1 of the Stevens treaties going to the U.S. Supreme Court. Commercial passenger fishing vessel case is case number 7. And the Stevens treaties, the Supreme Court has upheld the Stevens treaty. When I look at the date of that Winans case, I am just stunned that the Supreme Court in 1905 protected the Yakima peoples and their right under the Stevens treaties. Okay, next slide, please. Your next point. I think what's coming up next. Oh, okay. My tribe's from Oklahoma. If you haven't heard of the McGirt case, you need to buy my 2023 book. I'll be happy to send you a photo of it. I consider this the most, I called it a bombshell when the case came out. We now find out that 49% of Oklahoma is Indian country. The enormous reservations in eastern Oklahoma didn't disappear like we all thought. And the McGirt decision on July the 9th, 2020 held that the Muskogee Creek Reservation still exists. 3.25 million acres of land. And since then, Oklahoma state courts have borrowed the analysis from McGirt and have recognized the treaties of the reservations of 9 other tribes as still existing. My own tribe's reservation, a piddly little 14,000 acres from 1888, is sitting on a federal district court judge's desk waiting to be affirmed. And I don't know why he's waiting so long. He says it's because he's so busy. But anyway, McGirt is an enormous example of fulfilling treaty promises. My wife woke me up that morning and said, gosh, I think the tribes won that case. And I couldn't believe it because I knew what a bombshell it would be. And that's the opening line of Justice Gorsuch's opinion. Now, I presume most of you know what the Trail of Tears is. The 5 big tribes from the south moved to what's now Oklahoma. The Cherokee were round up by bayonet and forced to go. But look how, I turned to my wife, Molly, and I go, yeah, you're right, we won. Look at that statement. At the far end of the Trail of Tears was a promise. What was the promise? It was the treaties that the tribes signed when they removed. My own tribe signed a treaty in 1831 to remove from Ohio to what was called the Indian Territory. And that's where we're at to this day. We were given a promise too. So maybe our reservation will be re-recognized soon. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, I'll be teaching this case in just a few weeks. The Mescalero Apache tribe is a reservation in New Mexico, and the state was trying to control hunting and fishing by non-Indians on the reservation. Now, this is a reservation that's totally owned by the tribe. Almost no non-Indians live there. There are some reservations that have been allotted, it's called, under federal policies from 1887, and lots of non-Indians live on some reservations these days, but not at Mescalero. I think the tribe owned 96% of the land, and the only other land owned by anybody was the federal government and the state to run a couple schools. The U.S. Supreme Court held that the state cannot regulate hunting and fishing on the res. Tribes are sovereigns. They make these decisions themselves. In this situation, I gave you the facts. A reservation where the tribe still owns almost all the land, and there's almost no non-Indians living there. So that ties in a little bit to what you folks are faced with. Next point, please. I've already mentioned Winans. Don't think I need to say anything more. The Winans brothers, well, they did something that you might find interesting. They installed a fish wheel. I wonder if any of you know what a fish wheel is. It's just a water wheel, but in such a narrow piece of where the river flows, and then it has buckets on it, and the flow of the current makes the wheel turn, and the buckets catch the fish. And hardly one fish can get by because they're so efficient. So not only were the Winans contesting Indians crossing their property, but they had installed a water wheel under a license from the state of Washington. And there just like really were no fish to catch there for the native peoples. And the tribes won this case. And again, the United States brought it using the trust responsibility, protecting tribal fishing rights, tribal treaty fishing rights. And the Winans won this case, or the United States won this case. Next point, please. Gee, same case we already talked about. Now, I didn't make this point last. You guys may have wondered, why did I say, like 10 minutes ago, tribes own 50% of the harvest of the migrating salmon? Because of a lower federal district court case that we'll mention in a moment. Maybe you all know the name, the Bolt decision. Everybody should throw their hand. Do you know what the Bolt decision is? That was Judge George Bolt in the Western District of Washington made a decision, a 112-page decision in 1974, and he said that because of the Stevens Treaties, the tribes own half of the harvestable fish. Now I want you to pause a moment. Indians make up about 1.5% to 2% of the population. So this looked grossly unfair to just the average Washingtonian. Why do 2% of Washingtonians get 50% of the fish? Now that, whoa, what? And so, some people thought that's sort of a DEI kind of thing. We weren't using that phrase back then. Do you know that there were protests in Washington? There was a petition signed by 80,000 Washingtonians to have George Bolt, oh my gosh, I'm blanking on the word, pulled out of office. How am I blanking on the word? Not recalled, that's sort of what it is in state elections, but to have him dejudged, boy, that's a word. He was hung in effigy. People knew who Bolt was just because this was such an emotional point. There were bumper stickers in the state of Washington that said, can Bolt not fish? So they wanted to fire him. Wow. So people whose business was running charter fishing on the coast maybe, or dip netters this was money in their pocket. And if 50% of the fish are reserved for 2% of the population, that is kind of startling if you don't know what the law is, and you don't know treaty rights, and you don't know the supremacy clause of the Constitution. Those treaties They trump state law. They're the supreme law of the land. And so the court has, of course, I say admirably enforced those treaties. So this 1979 case literally reaffirmed Judge Bolt's decision from 1974, in which he said 45 to 50% of the fish belonged to the tribal fishermen. And the Supreme Court in this 1979 case says, yes, tribes own up to 50% of the harvestable amount. That's pretty stunning when you're talking about 2% of the population and a valuable, I guess I should ask some of you, what is the harvest of salmon worth in Puget Sound and Columbia River? I say billions. Is it that high? I don't know. If one of you knows, please tell me and you educate me. Okay, so next point, please, Michelle. Now, this is the Bolt decision and the U.S. v. Oregon decision filed even earlier and decided even earlier by Judge Baloney, but it doesn't and that's not B-A-L-O-N-E-Y. It's B-E-L-L-O-N-I, Judge Baloney. These two judges were like honored and respected, and there were ceremonies for them and stuff. And these two cases, I don't assume most of you know much about the law, but usually when a decision is made, the court renders its judgment. The court now has no continuing power over that matter, or what we call continuing jurisdiction. The case is done and over and the court is through with it. But these two cases are still open and what we call continuing jurisdiction in the Western District of Washington and in the District of Oregon. So a federal district judge, and here in Oregon, I'm not in Oregon, am I? But Michael Simon is the judge that is now inherited. Judge Malcolm Marsh inherited the caseload from Judge Baloney when he retired or passed away. And I believe those are the three judges in Oregon, federal judges, that have had to handle U.S. versus Oregon on a continuing basis every year. In Washington, I don't know the names of the judges. I'm from Oregon. But in Washington, these cases are still open. In both courts, they are the oldest cases still open. And what do they do every year? You know better than me. They make decisions about the Endangered Species Act, I guess. They decide how many fish can be harvested. You guys know better than me. The Columbia River's broke up into regions, right? The tribes fish in Region 5, is it, or Region 6? And so the court tries to manage the catch and the operation of the dams so that there's fish for the tribal peoples to catch, because that's their treaty right. The right that the tribes acquired, the right that the tribes reserved for themselves, and this is what the Supreme Court recognizes in that 1979 case, was not just the right to go fishing. Fishing for tribal cultures and economies is not just a Sunday recreational outing you take your kids fishing. This is economic, this is cultural, this is religious. And the tribes reserve these rights, and they have the right to 50% of the catch. So Washington was arguing that, the tribal right is only to go fishing. And the Supreme Court struck that down, slapped that down as hard as you can. No, the tribes reserve the right to catch the fish to live on. I've written articles on this, and I give you some links here in a minute. You can get these articles for free if you want to read them. My memory now, my gosh, I wrote one of them in 1990. I think the tribal diet was about 70% salmon. The first salmon ceremony, you can still go at near Celilo Falls at the Warm Springs Longhouse. If you want to show up for the first salmon ceremony, they will feed you. That's very much a religious/cultural ceremony. These cultures lived on the fish. Creator or the Great Father, whatever, arranged for these fish to come back, and these tribes lived on it. They traded with it. Do you know that when Lewis and Clark came through what's now the Dalles, Oregon, in I suppose that would be about September of 1805, they bought 2 tons of dried and pounded salmon that native peoples had put in woven baskets. And Lewis and Clark bought that from them at the Great Narrows, the Big Narrows and the Small Narrows are now buried. They were what was Celilo Falls, I guess, near the Dalles. William Clark wrote in the Lewis and Clark journals in March of 1806 that this is the great mart, M-A-R-T, of the West. There were so many goods for sale at that. Okay, I'm spinning off on another topic of mine. Sorry. What time is it? If you get me talking, because now I'm talking about economic. Oh my goodness.
We've got about 10 minutes, but we can go over a little
You
too.
need to give me another half hour. Okay, next bullet point, please. Here's the case. So as soon as Davia called me, I go, wow, there was a case on UNA's like yesterday. So I've read this case. The Stillaguamish tribe sued under the U.S. v. Washington, the continuing jurisdiction of the U.S. v. Washington case. The Stillaguamish said, hey, wait a minute, we have a lot more UNA sites than you guys authorized us, and we can prove it. And so I suppose this is what you folks face if tribes from Washington are claiming rights in Oregon, or I understand there's some arguing about U of A sites among Oregon tribes. That I'm not commenting on, but I'm giving you just some background. So the Stillaguamish claim, no, we had ocean rights to fish too, not just in the Stillaguamish River. But the federal district judge listened to their historical evidence. So it's historical, sociological, anthropological, maybe even archaeological evidence of where this tribe had fished and at historic times and at treaty times. So the date for your historical evidence is sort of the day you signed the treaty and backwards. Did you fish? Was this rock right here or that little creek? Was that a usual and accustomed site for your tribe? Did you put weirs, W-E-I-R, folks? If surely you all know what that is. It's a wooden framework of crossing wood that they put in the river, and the salmon would catch their gills in it. Just like gill net fishing today, the native peoples would put wooden weirs in the river. And the native peoples were also smart enough that you could only put that weir out for a day or so, and you had to take it out. You got to let some spawners go through, else guess what? You have no fish to eat next year. So there's an interesting book from 1970, Treaties on Trial, I think it's called. It was written by the Quakers, I think, who got heavily involved in this battle about tribal salmon treaty fishing rights in the Pacific Northwest. And then there's another book by Faye G. Cohen. I think maybe that's the one called Treaties on Trial. But the tribes had all sorts of keep the river clean. A menstruating woman was not supposed to go out in a boat and be on the river at that time. They just had all these thoughts about keep that river clean, keep those salmon running, and they knew how to manage their rights. But in this case, the Stillaguamish lost the case. The federal district judge says, you've not presented me evidence that you fished at these other spots in the ocean at treaty time or before treaty time. And so the Stillaguamish lost this case. The other tribes resisted. They go, hey, you never fished in these sites. Don't infringe on our UNAs. So it was the Stillaguamish against about 5 or 6 other tribes. Okay, next slide, please. And hit the button. Now, okay, so we've kind of, okay, these are just my sites. So hit the button one more, please. So if you want to read these articles, these are my final drafts. They're at this SSRN, if you've never heard of it. That stands for Social Science Research Network. There's about 4 million articles posted there by about 600,000 authors. And these are my articles. Some of them. That first one I published in the Oregon Law Review. And it says the salmon were being listed under the Endangered Species Act. I wrote this 60, 70-page article arguing that the Endangered Species Act does not take tribal treaty salmon fishing rights. That is still an open question to this day. And of course, I still think I'm right. We'll see if it ever gets litigated. The next question, I wrote this article in 1999. Of course, the Makah Indian tribe went whaling for the first time in 70-some years. And so I wrote a 100-page article on what I called cultural self-determination. Still kind of chilling to me and interesting about the macaw keeping alive this dangerous activity of whaling that they had done for thousands of years. Okay, next slide, please. I think this might be more articles. Of course, I don't make any money off this, so I'm not trying to sell you a book. So I wrote a book chapter for my tribe on our 11 treaties. Back one, please. I literally gave a talk at my tribe's powwow on September the 22nd on this. And there's a short little piece of paper on how we interpret treaties, how the federal courts. Well, let me just say this out right now. We know the Indian peoples didn't speak English. We know Indian peoples didn't have their attorney. Governor Isaac I. Stevens had his Harvard graduated attorney with him. Lieutenant George Gibbs probably wrote the Stevens treaties. They are all 10 almost identical. The clause on fishing and hunting is identical except the macaw. And so that's what my article on the macaw brings out. The macaw insisted we go whaling and we take seals. So they added in the Macaw Treaty, signed January 31, 1855, way out there at Nia Bay on the northwest tip of Washington. Their treaty says the tribe can fish and go whaling and sealing at all usual and accustomed spots. So this tribe's treaty is slightly different because they lived on a different asset and they went whaling. So how do we interpret that today? The way the native peoples would have heard it and the way they would have understood it. So we read the treaty minutes that were kept by perhaps a military officer. My tribe's treaties in the 1830s, there was a Quaker there, missionary, and wrote a book, literally. And here's what was said, here's what was promised. And so courts will use today those kind of statements. The district court decision from 1974, Judge George Bolt, they literally had on the stand tribal elders who said, my grandfather was at that treaty session, and this is what he always said it means. Now, normally in the law, that would be considered hearsay. We don't let somebody testify to what someone else said. But a federal court is supposed to interpret treaties liberally in favor of the tribal person, the tribal nation, because of the English language, because they didn't read or write maybe. And what do these legal terms mean? The tribes had no lawyer, but Isaac I. Stevens had his. Okay, next point, please, Michelle. And let's do these. I have them printed out here. I may have only a couple slides left. Hit the next one, please, so folks can read this. I literally did a computer research of the ORS, the Oregon Revised Statutes. Indians are mentioned 708 times. I was stunned at that. Hit the next one, please. You folks have something called the State Commission on Indian Services that was created in 1975. I think state law requires you to, when you're dealing with tribal issues, tribal assets, you should be consulting with the CIS. Protecting Indian cairns is what the statute says, meaning grave sites. Next slide, please. Next point. So archaeological sites, next point. Historical materials, I think there's one more point. Okay, I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. Michelle, hit it and hit it and hit it. This is all about federal consultation with tribes. Hit it again. President Bill Clinton issued the first executive orders mandating the federal executive branch to consult with tribes before doing anything that impacted tribal rights. Next point, please. George Bush added a memoranda and used the phrase government to government. So Republican administration, it didn't matter. We are going to engage with tribes on a government to government situation. And this is what Oregon's done, even though not mandated by the Constitution, not mandated by the federal Indian law principles, but Washington and Oregon have stepped up and engaged in consultations and activities with tribes. Next point, please. Obama added a memorandum and Biden made a big statement in 2021. So this is a bipartisan issue about dealing with tribes as the Constitution mandates. Next slide, please. Do this one fast. Skip this, please. I thought I deleted that. Next slide, please. Bullet points, please. Next one. Oh, go back one. So if you want to read an article and quite a lot of research I did on federal consultation with tribes, that's the law review article. That's free. You can check that out. I wrote that in 2015. Next slide, please. Next point. See, now you guys got me in a hurry, and I'm now, well, I gotta get done. Okay, so here I underlined something that's important to you guys, and this is new. Statute of just July of 2023, statute of January 2024. Oregon law requires some consultations. I mentioned this point earlier. So you as an agency of the federal, state government, excuse me, whoever your attorneys are, better be aware of these statutes, better be engaging with CIS, the Commission on Indian Services, which is a state agency, climate and indigenous practices. That's what the statute says. I wouldn't have to argue very long to say that indigenous practices is fishing and hunting. And that's what you folks are dealing with. There's a case not long ago about cowlets in Washington hunting off reservation. I don't even remember how the state case turned out. I think the tribal people won, but in essence, he was proving a UNA for hunting. And so you may have these issues in Oregon. Next bullet point. This may be the last slide. Okay, this could be very important for you folks. I'm running out of time. These are federal decisions in which the federal government got themselves in big trouble for not consulting and working properly with tribal peoples in addressing tribal lands and tribal assets. So here, this federal district judge just ripped the Obama administration, chastised the Obama administration severely. They didn't include the tribes. They didn't reach out to the tribes. They just wrote form letters. The tribe was saying, let's meet. I want to meet with the heads of your department. And the department blew them off. And the tribe, the Obama administration, if you guys remember back in 2009, they were trying to do things that were shovel ready to try to recover from the recession of 2008, 2009. And the feds the court put a screeching halt to this because the feds had not consulted properly. So I hope you folks never get in trouble for not consulting. Oregon law does apply to you, that provision I just showed you. Next point, please. So these are federal requirements. But this applies to you. Plan with tribes. Don't tell them later what you decided. That's not consultation. When you turn to your spouse and go, we're going to Vegas for our summer vacation, that's not consulting with your significant other. Maybe asking, where do you want to go, for vacation? Different. That's a whole different thing than just saying, we're going here. Next point, please. And next point, please. Well, this is another case the Forest Service got themselves in big trouble. They literally lied about the efforts they had made to consult with the Pueblo of Sandia about development of a federal park in Forest Service lands. And the 10th Circuit chastised them vigorously and made them start over. So respect and consideration, your work, you folks all represent the state of Oregon, but when you're talking to tribal peoples, tribal leaders, let me rephrase that. And let me tell you one point. Somebody who walks in your office and says, I'm a Yakima member and you've got to consult with me. Well, I think I would ask them, are you a representative? Did the Yakima Nation send you here? Because if they're just Joe Blow and happens to be Yakima, they're pretty much the same as just a public citizen. But if they are a representative of the tribal government, I would say you better pay great attention. Okay, next point. I think we're almost done. One more point. Federal government published this booklet, the National Park Service, and I think it's 1978, how to deal with tribal cultures and tribal peoples. And next slide, I think that might be the end. Yeah, that's the end. So what heck, did I get done on time? Are there any, multiple questions. Somebody's got hands up twice. And Mark has, but let's ask I don't know your name. Oh, Mary. You're muted. Muted. You are muted.
Thank you. I'll let Mark go first. He had his hand up first. So go ahead, Commissioner Labhart. Thank you.
Okay, this is a catch-22 question for you all, so I'll say that right up front, Bob. So I'd like to know how, if you're aware of any other states that deal with this issue. We have been approached by tribal leadership on some Oregon tribes about considering consultation with us. And as a sovereign government, we say, yes, we would like to consult. The catch is that we have to operate under public meeting laws as a public body under the state of Oregon laws. And so the tribes say, well, we would like to consult with you privately. And we as a body have been instructed, and I think Aaron's on the call, our attorney, that no, we can't do that because of Oregon's public meeting law. So are you aware of other states having similar issues, and how do they deal with that? How do they address that?
Well, you say Aaron's on the call, and this is awfully close to legal advice, so I got to be real careful here. So you listen to what Aaron tells you to do. But what you just said as a state agency, yeah, your obligations, public, what do we call that? Operating in the sunshine, right? Out in the open. Tribes have been loath to deal with the federal government about grave sites, et cetera. Let me tell you something that happened in Oregon that maybe you folks don't know. Tribes told the state of Oregon where some of their burials were down in the southeastern part of the state. And so this is about 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And then the state allowed somebody to build a new lake. They just ran a bulldozer through there and bones were popping up out of the ground. Now, even to this day, there's allegations that those were animal bones, not humans. But boy, was that a big kerfluffle. And lawsuits were filed. I don't think the state lost anything, but the tribes, these were supposed to be private. They told the state because they hoped they would protect stuff, and it didn't do any good at all. So I think you'll find tribes sometimes loathe to say much because, yes, they know about your laws of operating in, the sunshine. And, but you asked me if I know of any circumstances. So there's that Oregon example, other tribes, the Tennessee Valley Authority buried areas that had tribal burials and things were floating. The Mississippi River goes up and down every year and bones appear. Tribes, some of the Lakota tribes have sued about this. So yeah, there are big issues about these kind of things. I can't think of something just off the top of my head to give you any guidance. But, obviously you have to take your advice from Aaron.
Thank you. My question, first of all, thank you for the presentation. It's deeply useful and I appreciate it. There are a lot of differences among the treaty tribes and the recognized tribes. Could you just say a couple sentences about what happens with the non-recognized tribes? Do any of the trust responsibilities flow to them? Do the benefits flow to them at all? Or is it just separate?
A non-federally recognized tribe falls in the category of a racial group. And if the United States does something for them, you are going to be accused of DEI or so how far can they do something? So it's funny, hey, so I know people that belong to non-federally recognized tribes. There are state recognized tribes, but sorry, states, that's not federal Indian law. So, yeah, I don't know what to say. A non-tribal person, a member of a non-federally recognized tribe, I think in Washington, the Duwamish tribe is still non-federally recognized, and yet they signed on to some of the Stevens treaties. Now maybe I should use that as my exam question. Yeah, what rights do they have? They were a signatory. And I wanted to say this earlier, folks, for you all, which I did not at the time. So I'm a tribal person, right? I'm a citizen of a tribe. But I cannot go fish in the Pacific Northwest under the treaties signed by those 4 tribes in the Columbia River and the other tribes in Puget Sound. The citizens of the signatory tribes had those rights, not every Indian in the United States. So I have to buy a license from Oregon or Washington. I have to do the same bag limits, et cetera, et cetera. But anyway, so yeah, non-federally recognized tribe just do not have the rights of Indian peoples, and I don't know what to say about treaty rights, because I just brought up the very example about the Duwamish. They should have the rights under the treaty, shouldn't they? But I don't think that's ever been litigated, and I don't know the answer.
Thank you. We have a couple other questions, so we'll go to those first to Davia Palmieri and then to Vice Chair Hatfield Hyde.
Thanks, Chair Wall. I just wanted to ask, it's a kind of a related question to what you were just talking about the treaties. You know, in Oregon, we have the Western Oregon Termination Act and the effect on those tribes. And many of those tribes, their treaties were not ratified. And I don't know if you can provide any comments on how that affects their rights.
There were at least 20 treaties that were signed in 1850 at Tansey Point, I think it's called. I do not know where Tansey Point is, but it is in Oregon. And with them never being ratified, they're just a document that means nothing. And then why weren't they ratified? Because disease was hitting the tribes so rapidly, they were being moved. So this takes me back to my George Washington slide. They got the tribes' lands and assets for free on the cheap, because, you know, they handed out smallpox blankets and they killed, and, you know, folks, okay, this is not the place for that talk. But in California, the miners went out on weekend when they weren't mining. They like to rape and kill Indians. So the story in California is just egregious. And I don't know how much that happened in Oregon. But so these tribes, you know, Confederate tribes of Grand Ronde that I'm on the court system, Confederate tribes of Siletz, a lot of these were Rogue River tribes and coastal tribes from way down south. And they were marched on their own Trail of Tears up to where their reservations are today. But unsigned, unratified treaties just don't mean anything. They have no legal power. And Becky?
You.
I think that issue is that unratified treaty issue is also just painful, right? For tribes that are in that situation, and complex for those of us who are trying to consult respectfully across tribes in the state. I guess a question I have, and it's not very well formed, but you sort of mentioned this in your issue with Oklahoma, but what about, like, we have an example of this in Oregon, and I'd rather not use an Oregon example just because I think that's awkward. But if you, from the tribe you came from, were to go back and acquire land in the region your tribe came from, and there were other tribes in that region, what do you feel your rights would be in that region in respect to other issues? I guess I can, instead of being so couched, I'll just throw this out there. We have, for example, the Modoc tribe that ended up being sent, unfortunately, some of the Modoc sent to Oklahoma, and then now they have come back into Oregon. And, you know, what are their rights as it relates to the sovereign rights of the Klamath tribes, which also include the Modocs? I mean, it's so confusing, right?
Yes.
Like, it's so confusing.
Well, come take my class, Becky, and it won't be that.
I want to. Can I go? Can I come to law
Sure.
school?
Folks, it's
Okay,
interesting
sorry.
you mentioned the Modocs, because my
Yeah.
tribe sold the United States 4,000 acres for the Modocs to have a reservation. So they abut their not yet a re-recognized reservation, but their lands abut ours. A tribal person that wanders back home, like if I went to Ohio, That's where my
Yeah.
tribe in Western Pennsylvania is where my tribe was for thousands of years. We're going to Ohio on Tuesday to see the earthworks that the ancestors of my Shawnee people. It's now a UNESCO World Heritage Site, the earthworks and stuff. But anyway, that I digress. I would have no rights there over any other regular person. So if I bought a piece of land in fee simple, I'd be the same as any Ohioan person. So MODOK's coming home. If they're buying land in Southern Oregon, it's not Indian country unless they can get the United States to take it into trust for them. Then it would be Indian country under a federal statute, 18 USC 1151C. But when a native person buys a piece of land, it's still just a piece of land, and it depends on the parameters of the jurisdiction of where they buy that land. So the MODOKs cannot just come back, or I could not go to Ohio and just try to reclaim where my tribe was at one time.
Unless it was put into trust by the federal
If
government.
I can
again.
convince, yes.
Yeah, and then it would not necessarily have the same reserved rights.
No, because I
of
don't have
the
a treaty.
Of the Klamath tribes that
And the
also have
MODOKs
MODOK people.
The MODOKs
Yeah.
were removed as prisoners of
Yeah.
war.
Right.
I've never heard of the MODOKs having a treaty, so their
Yeah.
rights would be just on the lands they bought if the federal government takes it into trust.
I just want to say that I so appreciate this presentation, and I'm a total nerd when it comes to these issues and completely interested in them. I also think that what I have learned from you is that it is deeply complicated to be a good decision maker as it relates to these issues.
Well, it is. You folks, you're
Yeah.
You're in a liberal state. You have a governor that's pro-tribal.
Yeah.
Those laws that I just showed you were just passed in the last 2 years.
Right.
But yet you're a public agency. You're representing Oregon. You have to operate in the sunshine. So yes, you've talked to Erin. Get your direction from her.
Poor Erin. Erin has to go, get her PhD in Indian legal rights from you too.
Well,
it's
Erin
a lot.
can buy
so
my
thank
books.
You.
You guys can buy my books.
Yes. Thank you.
You can get those articles for free online.
I want them all. I want all the articles. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
And we do really appreciate this seminar, presentation, whatever we should call it. It really is, it's a first step, but it's a great first step for us in some of these pieces. I'd like to first maybe go back to, we have one more question from a commissioner, and then I'll go to Davia to start to sum up. Commissioner Spellbrink.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Wall. And just not really a question, a comment. I think probably most of us here have sat through some form of higher education, and we've all had those times where sitting under some professor or something where talk about time immemorial, it just seemed like it lasts forever, and then other folks like you, and this is a compliment for sure, is that time just flies and you want more. So anyway, just a compliment. Really appreciated your presentation. Like I say, if I was close, I'd sign up. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Davia, put that in a letter and then send it to my dean so I can get a raise.
I will absolutely do that.
Well, I'm delighted to visit with you all. Yes, I'm a citizen here now, but I come back every summer to Oregon, and that's my home. My parents met working in the Kaiser shipyards in 1943. I can't believe I moved down here. Let me tell you guys a joke. When they called me down here, my third book came out on economic development in Indian country. And a professor from here called me, wonderful book. And she goes, have you ever thought of moving? And I said, to hell? And now where do I live? It's hell.
We won't put that in the book.
Well, and Bob, I agree with you. When I looked at my clock and saw that it was 11:15, I'd already spoken for an hour. I was going, oh, man. So time flies when you're having fun.
And it's deeply useful. Davia, let's see if there's anything else you need to kind of summarize or anything you wanted to say?
No, just the thank you so much to Bob for agreeing to spend this time with us and for being so dynamic and interesting because it is hard, complicated. I've never heard it more understandable and interesting. All these federal cases as a non-lawyer who maybe wonders if I should go to law school too because it sounds fun.
Arizona State, come down here with the pitchfork. This is our symbol. It's the pitchfork. Because our mascot is Sparky. He's a devil. He's got the horns and the tail, and we do this. So come on down here, Davia. You can be in my class.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much. I
Thank
enjoyed
you.
doing this.
And as with the earlier presentation, if we could get the slides afterwards, if that's a
Yeah,
possibility. that would be
Michelle
great.
has them, and it's a good thing I sent those to you, Davia, because I don't know if I was going to be able to do it.
I'm glad we planned ahead. It went great.
Okay, thank you all
much.
very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Chair, well, just for you, time check, our plan for the last section of the training was just thoughts from the commission, things you want to follow up on, other questions you might have. We could, since we don't have a ton of time left, make that, send me an email if there's things people want to talk about. I just had a few comments about where the department staff want to go from here, but I want to see what you think, Mary, about where we go next. Sorry, Chair Wall.
Well, I think, and it's fine to go to the merit. I think any comments that we can send by email instead of doing them now would be great. I do want to just mention, if I could, besides there being a ton packed into the two presentations that we heard today, it was similar with the video on heart and spirit of tribal consultation. And that was central to what we're talking about. I think that it's a rich set of comments and more perspective from the tribes than we've gotten to hear before. And some of them were very different, but it was eye-opening. I think just one of them was the length of leadership service that the tribal leaders often have compared to our agencies that turn over. That was, there's just a bunch of eye-opening comments from the tribes. And as you listen to those a couple times through, it starts to really hit home on some common themes on consultation. So to the extent that we have the time to go back to that video again and look at some of the pieces, we heard again today, interestingly enough, the thing about don't come to us when it's done, come to us at the start or before the start and talk to us before the start. There were just a lot of really valuable things in there. So thank you to the agency, to the director, to you, Davia, for this whole thing. And I think we're off to a good start. I'll look to the other commissioners for a couple quick comments if you want to make any, and then we'd need to reserve a few minutes to talk about next steps, including where to go from here with working with staff. So commissioners, it looks like we have Vice Chair Hatfield-Hyde and Commissioner King. So let's do those two first.
Yeah, I just want to commend Davia for putting this together and Director Colbert for and Chair Wall for us having this session and the really good materials that came before. And just say I would appreciate a hyperlinked document from the presentation we just had, if that's possible. I'd also like to say that in listening to especially the tribal consultation videos that you guys provided, that consult early and often and let people in on the ground floor, I think was super important. And also, it did not explicitly come up in any of the training we've done so far, but I think what it comes down to is respect between sovereigns. And so as a commission, when we think about what we might want to do in the future, well, as it relates to these issues. I think that we have to keep an eye out very closely for that thread of respect between the sovereigns as well. So we have had some issues in the last bit that we're all aware of. And I think that there was not time allowed for the sovereigns to respectfully work out differences before issues came to us. And if we see that kind of turmoil out there between sovereigns, I think that's, time is not the problem is the problem, and we need to give it time. So if we move towards best practices, should be an atmosphere of respect across sovereigns. That's just a thought I have.
Thank you. Let's go to Commissioner King.
Yes, thank you, Chair Wall. Yeah, and today has been great. Always learn new things, new little tidbits. And it sort of follows on to what Vice just said. Like, I think we need to, like, a start is just that, it's a start. But I think we should not fall into the trap of binary or duality, that understand that this is a really complex issue, and it's between sovereigns, it's among sovereigns, it's, it's so many things. But like, as I was sitting there reading this, and I know Chair Wall and I, we've talked about this before, when we talked about the 5 civilized tribes, that it didn't help them that they were civilized. They still got walked down the Trail of Tears with everybody else. They walked with their slaves in tow, and so that's what always just strikes me. It's like, there is so much to the story. And by going through it too quickly, we miss so much cultural richness and the huge multifaceted aspect that is out there, that I think by going too quickly, we miss that. And so it is important to really slow it down and really think and really absorb like what is happening to all of the peoples, because this did not happen in a vacuum. So to me, that's my big takeaway. And the other big takeaway that I've brought up more than once, and now that I've been a commissioner for 4 years, we've kind of gone nowhere with it, so I'll bring it up again. And that is the issue of land acknowledgement. And every time I've brought it up, it's been like, well, the tribes don't want it, or they would rather us talk about, consultation or whatever the issue is. But I would push back again. We need to realize this is multifaceted, and it's not just about the tribes. And, as I sit in the Fred Meyer drainage, and I sit in like the most diverse part of the state, the people that come up to me and want it aren't tribal members. That's what they're saying. They want to acknowledge, like they want to talk about the people that were here before and what is their story. And we see their names, but who are they as people? What does it all mean? As we get closer and closer to what people call the lie that is Thanksgiving, like the people that are doing the unthanksgivings and all of that, that's when this always comes up. And I really think that we just need to, again, consult the people that potentially would be involved. But I think we need to realize that this is a bigger, broader issue. And all sorts of groups, like I was just with the Oregon Archaeological Society. I was just with a group, the Montana Cultural Resources people. They do a land acknowledgement. And it just seems so remiss that we don't, when we have so much in common with some of these groups. So that's where I'll leave that. This will be a part of the ongoing conversation and the ongoing follow-up we need to have. But that's kind of my big takeaways from today, is that looking at this bigger and going forward together, and what that means.
Thank you, Commissioner King. Let's go to Commissioner Labhart, and then I have one other comment, and then we'll give it back to the director and Davia.
I would just like to thank Davia for putting this together. I think it's not only beneficial for the commission, I think it was beneficial for the staff that listened, and I also think it's very beneficial for the public. I think not only did we learn, the staff learned, and so did the public. And then I did want to, I think Dr. Colbert's going to cover this, but there was a really important meeting yesterday on the Monsanto, and she's willing to take 5 minutes to talk to the commission about it. I think it's really important that the commission hear what happened yesterday with the first meeting of the Monsanto settlement group. So, thanks.
Why don't we go right to, thank you, Commissioner Labhart. Why don't we go right to that, Director Colbert, and other things that you wanted to finish up with?
Thank you. And thank you, Commissioner Labhart, for kind of flagging this. I will touch on that meeting, but before I do so, I just want to say how much I appreciate all of you taking the time to do this today. Honestly, I was at this tribal summit, government to government summit, and all of the agency heads were there, and we were talking kind of like sidebar kind of stuff. And every time I mention how much time you all put in, their eyebrows go up. I need to test this statement, but I think that as a commission, you meet more than any other state commission or board in natural resources. And so for you to also take this half a day to lean into this training, I so appreciate it. And Professor Miller, before he came in today, said he never gets any questions. Look at how you all show up. I'm just like, oh my gosh. So anyway, I just want to thank you so much for your engagement on this. And again, this is just the start of the conversation. And so Davia will be kind of planning an engagement with you and with each of the 9 federally recognized tribes in Oregon to talk about how we do engagement and best practices. And then we'll be we'll be coming back to you and talking through that as we go. And then I will mention that the new council that Commissioner Labhart mentioned is the Oregon Environmental Restoration Fund Council. And this is the council that was created in statute in 2024 legislative session that will be dispersing the funds associated with the Monsanto settlement with the state of Oregon. You'll remember that Oregon settled for about $600 million with the Monsanto Corporation and its predecessors. Order of magnitude bigger settlement than any other state in the US was able to secure. And I think that the legislature was really very smart in looking at that money. When we're talking about forever chemicals like PCBs, thinking about, how do we set up an environmental fund that is lasting? And so the fund will be set aside with the treasurer, and they will be dispersing only the interest on the fund for at least 50 years. The statute sets it up that they have to keep the corpus of that 600 million in funds. And then the interest will be allocated into 3 different buckets. One bucket goes directly to Oregon's 9 federally recognized tribe. One bucket goes to state agencies in Oregon that have a nexus to the settlement agreement with Monsanto. And one bucket is for a new community restoration fund. So yesterday's meeting was the kickoff. The director of the Department of Fish and Wildlife is named as one of the members of the council. It includes the director of environmental quality, the governor's office, the state AG, and legislative members, and another number of other public members and people that are subject matter experts on this kind of contamination. Met yesterday. Really kind of first meeting, we needed to get a distribution policy in place for how to plan for that 50-year timeline with that interest. That was approved yesterday with the acknowledgement that will be revisited over time to make sure that the interest earnings are consistent with maintaining that core. And then in December, the council will begin setting priorities for the state funds and the community funds, and then also doing some priority setting for the funds. Commissioner Labhart, I know that you were listening to the meeting, so please let me know if there's anything that you heard that you wanted me to flag as well.
Well, just maybe the tribes are still on, but one of the first priorities was going to be getting the distribution out to the tribes. And then I think state agencies was going to be next. And then these all require administrative rules. And then the public. So it's pretty important that I think we let the tribes know that they're going to be the first out of the bucket. And then I think the figure that was being kicked around is still a lot of work. Still, don't quote anybody on it, but it's like 30 million a year, wasn't it, for the interest? So this produces a lot of interest and produces a lot of revenue that's going to be really positive for the department and tribes and others. So that's my input.
Great. I'm so glad you mentioned that number. Yeah, that is what the distribution policy set as the estimate would be around 30 million annually. I'm happy to take any questions.
I don't see any from the commission. I'll come back to you in just 1 second. Commissioner Hatfield-Hyde, I saw yours just go up. The next topic, and we only have a couple minutes, of course, or a few minutes, but we do need to talk about next steps, including one that is at least a possibility, is having one commissioner involved with staff as they move forward. It's one that I would actually think of assigning to myself, but I would really appreciate it if any commissioner thinks they have A, the time, and B, the interest, if we go that route. Let me know either by phone, email, text, something in the next week, if you will. Let's go to you, Debbie, for any next step description, or were you going to have Davia do that? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Commissioner Hatfield-Hyde.
Yeah, I think Director Colbert, I cannot even imagine a better time to potentially have some infusion of these kind of dollars into Oregon for a variety of reasons. And I know just even in relationships I have with some tribes in Oregon, there's some really important federal funding that's being dislocated at the moment that stops momentum on really important issues. And so I'm deeply interested in how we can appropriately get these dollars on the ground and match them with like our OWIB funds and things that are out there. There's great need, and it's incredible that we have this resource in Oregon. I know we want all these other things like RAWA and 1% for wildlife, but I think that there's huge need for it out there.
Yeah, totally agree. Thank you, Vice Chair Hatfield-Hyde. And Chair Wall, I guess I'll just hand it off to Davia on any last next steps on the consultation best practices.
Nothing really to add other than I think we will get started now that we've had this conversation, and we will look to see who might be involved from the commission. And we're not setting a hard deadline on it in respect to the fact that we want to pursue consultation with the tribes on what we're going to do here and development of our best practices and our principles for commission decision making, for department decision making. So if there's things you have in mind, notes you want to send me via email about what those best practices should consider, certainly heard what you've said here today. I think that'd be really helpful. Yeah, you'll hear more from us over the next few months about this.
Well, let's then maybe close on that note with one more thanks to the agency and to you, Davia, and you, Director Colbert, for bringing this and getting us headed out the door on these pieces. It was dense and great to get the materials and these presentations. So thank you.
We'll get you those links, and then just again a shout out to the awesome speakers today and to all of you.
Thank you. Enjoy your lunch.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Take care.